What's up guys, Rogue9 here and welcome to the Hot Breach podcast. This is a very special episode for a few reasons. We've been basically going for a whole year now. Technically this is episode number 50 around about then, but we've had a few that we've missed out along the way. So yes, our 1 year anniversary. With me as always is Prodigio Pete, but this time we will not have Get Flanked with us. Those of you who follow his channel will have seen that he's traveling. He's away capturing the Call of Duty multiplayer reveal. So he's playing that. Hopefully he'll come back with a first-hand experience of that. But instead, we have two very special guests with us today. If you follow Rainbow Six Siege, there is no introduction needed. We have the casters of Pro League. We will also know them from their streams. We have with us Interro, now coming back for the third time, I believe, and joining us for the first time, also KiXSTAr. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Really nice to have you. Thanks for making the time. Interro, you may be muted. Yes.
I am muted. Yeah, so fourth time.
Fourth time. I do apologize.
Fourth time, yeah. First with Mr. Star, the one and only. Nice to have him here.
I was on the first time with me. Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
Setting records.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this stuff.
I always tell you how great what you do is, and I'm always honored to be a part of it.
Thank you. I mean, we're just as honored that people enjoy what we do, really. So since we have both of you here and you are both professionals in the esports scene, we thought we'd make this episode maybe a little bit more esports focused, but still we'll start off with some Rainbow Six news. We had the developers update their issues and concerns blog last week, and there's a few interesting things coming there that we'd like to discuss. We also had the exploit post-mortem. We'll have a brief look at that and see what that means. And then, of course, over this weekend, now all four of us, of course, are heavily focused on Rainbow Six Siege, but there's no way that anyone could have really escaped the Fortnite World Cup that was on this weekend. And whatever you think of the game, I think it's been a significant event for esports in general. And there's a few things that I sort of want to consider and want to look at regarding this event and regarding how it's affected esports. And then maybe at the end, we can look at Rainbow Six Siege and do a little bit of a review of the first half of Season 10 of Pro League, because we always like to sort of end the show with a bit of a discussion of Pro League, and we've not really managed to put that much time into it. So this will be a great opportunity to have a discussion on that. So let's maybe start out with the top issues and concerns. And not all of this is brand new. We had the top issues and concerns come out a couple of weeks ago, but something that we will maybe look at is what has changed. So specifically, I think one of the points that was added was the rank disparity in ranked matchmaking. So the description of the issue is that players are able to take advantage of the matchmaking algorithm to play against lower skilled opponents. And the status of the devs tackling this issue is that a targeted release is during Year 4 Season 3, so the next season, and currently the status is in progress. We have detailed the approximate values that we want to restrict parties to, and we are working on the implementation. So this has been an issue, I think, for a long time. Maybe not so much for you guys who, when you do play ranked, are at very high levels, or certainly higher levels. But I think certainly for players sometimes in silver, sometimes in gold, maybe even platinum, it's been a frequent issue, and I believe maybe even more so on consoles, that you can run into a 5-stack of opponents where 3 of them will be diamond and maybe 1 of them might be copper or bronze or something like that. And it's great to see this issue tackled, but so the way I read this description, it seems like the solution that we're going to be getting is a restriction of players being able to party up. That brings issues with it to a degree, I think. Like, that was the first thing that people said, like, my friend and I, we like to play together, we're different ranks, can we continue playing together, right? That's the concern. So what are your thoughts on the problem in general and the solution that is being targeted?
I asked Itsepi about that, and he says we know that could potentially prevent friends from playing together, and we have capitals plans And then I said later on that I don't think there is necessarily a perfect solution to this problem. And he said, well, we think we've got one. So I went from actually being kind of concerned about it to being quite reassured. Although, he hasn't given any details. It does seem as though they have some sort of like really good solution to this problem and being able to play with your friends.
Certainly cryptic. I don't quite know. I mean, the way the blog post details it is like you won't be able to play with as long as you're too far apart anymore.
I mean, wording and the implementation often are different from each other. So I mean, it could be something entirely different that we see in the future than what the person who wrote this article had in mind or was told about. I mean, so it's not necessarily foreboding for the future. And me personally, this is something that hasn't really influenced my experience in Rainbow Six, but I've seen a lot of people, especially on like the main subreddit, who have been really upset with it. So I understand why they're putting a lot of effort into fixing it. So that's good to see. At least they recognize it's an issue. I mean, it's for me, this is just another example of Ubisoft after their restructure that they announced at the Invitational being proactive with fixing problems. So I'm just, I guess, happy about that.
Yeah, I mean, I got tagged in this actually yesterday. There was a bit of a snafu. I don't know if either of you guys saw this for about an hour or two on Twitter. It was a bunch of these German and Dutch players were queued up for ranked, and they ended up queuing into like Citizen from Navi alongside, I believe it was like Dezichu, who he was queued with, and like a couple of their friends. And I got a bunch of like DMs for it, and I don't know. It was really strange to me because it's like I can understand like why it's frustrating and all that jazz, but I think that the term boosting, it has a bit of a negative connotation to it. Like I think friends should be able to queue up with friends regardless of ranked, right? But I think where it draws the line is when it starts to infringe upon other people's enjoyment of ranked. And it's very obvious that there are times when it's like, sure, somebody could be a silver and you want to queue up with your buddy who's a diamond. Like that's not great, but at the end of the day, like what are your intentions behind it? The problem is that matchmaking doesn't see the intentions behind that. And realistically, like, yeah, you could do what Overwatch does and just lock it so that people of certain ranks can't play with people of other ranks. But I think we've talked about this on here before, where what I'd rather see is just try to set the level of opponents to like the highest ranked or just under the highest ranked. So, if it's like a diamond is queuing with like 3 coppers and like a bronze or something like that, like set the limit so that it's like they're playing up against plats or diamonds. Don't make it so that you're playing up against whatever the like amalgamation of all of those ranks divided by, whatever is, because realistically, like one diamond can single-handedly beat a lot of golds just like in a 1vx, depending on the way that they play it, depending on the map, etc. So obviously there's a frustration there for the casual player base, and it does definitely screw with the matchmaking algorithm. I'm curious, Pete, as to how they have plans to fix that. So we'll see what it is. But I'm eagerly awaiting their I guess announcement on that.
So I agree with what you just said, that it should be match made to like the highest rank. So if you have a situation where you have like a diamond and a copper or what have you, then okay, your copper friend can play with the diamond, but that means that copper is going to be playing against diamonds. However, one issue that people brought to my attention with that system is people that aren't queuing up in that group with you. So like, say I'm queuing with you, you're a diamond and I'm like low silver. But what about other people that are going to have to like play with me that aren't in our friendship group, that didn't queue together? So that would be a problem for them.
There is also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there is also the potential problem with weighted elo gain and loss. So like if you have, if you're like, let's say you want to queue with a bronze and you're a diamond and he plays against diamonds and then you win the match, then, if your team has more low ranks than the other team, then based on my understanding of the rank system right now, then they would all be gaining just obscene amounts of elo by winning that match. If it were to be the case, of course, it would be hard for them to pull that off given the rank disparity, but still.
That's actually a really interesting point. Yeah, Pete, go ahead.
What I was going to say is that I don't really think the problem is, like idiots like me, in gold or whatever, playing with like diamonds like Parker or KiXSTAr. I think the actual problem is Smurfs. it's like a group of friends, and then they have one Smurf account between them that they all log on and ensure, disconnects every match to D rank, and then they'll just probably take it in turns for one person to run that account to bring them all down to gold or something. And I think that's the problem, not really playing with friends.
I appreciate that you think I'm a diamond, Pete.
You are. You're a gem to me.
I might be a gem, but I'm certainly not a diamond. I think that this could be avoided by possibly having like a solo queue and a team queue as well. I've never really been opposed to that. I think that having like a solo queue is a smart idea for this game. And I mean, Kix can attest to that. Actually, all of us play in Europe, which I think is really funny now because Flanked isn't on here. So now we can all kind of take our I'm a North American, so is Kix, but we are in Europe now. So we'll take our European superiority and say that it's like, how much different would ranked be in EU if there was a dedicated solo and a dedicated team queue? Because, it's the language barrier is a huge issue. You could have somebody who is realistically like on their own, a gold or maybe a low plat, who's queued up with 4 people who are all diamond. They all speak the same language. They always 5-stack. They run into a lot of teams that don't coordinate. And then this person ends up getting, diamond. And then they go and they solo queue and they don't speak a language that anybody else on their team speaks. And they only got there because they got carried. And that alone also screws the matchmaking algorithm because it doesn't actually know that like solo, you're actually a gold, but like in a team, you're a diamond. So I have always advocated for this game to have like a solo and like a team queue. I don't know how feasible it is. And I don't know if it's in the pipeline, but I hope so.
If I can add to that, Parker, because it's something that I also am a huge advocate of. In my dream world, there is just a pure solo queue, and they have maybe like a 5-stack queue or something like that. That's my perfect universe. But obviously, there's a lot of people would say, well, that's gonna slow down the matchmaking. So my kind of meeting in the middle solution there for that would be just solo duo trio and abolish quad queues. Just get rid of, find one more or play with one less, and there you go. Because then solo duos and trios, they can play together, that can make a team, and that's just a little comfortable zone where you'll still get matches. It's not going to slow things down too much. And then you've got your 5-stack queue, which is just a totally different world of Siege. Any of us who've ever played on a team in a scrim or anything along those lines, or even played in a 5-stack of people who are communicating well, it's just an entirely different thing. So that would be my, kind of meet in the middle solution to the problem. But in a dream world, I just have a solo queue, a dedicated solo queue, and everything else can be figured out.
In a way, something the matchmaking already does, it does take queuing together into account. So technically, if a 5-stack comes up together, they get a slightly different weighting to how their MMR is calculated for the team compared to a solo stack or a team of solo queuers. But it's obviously not good enough, and it hasn't worked quite.
It's flawed in one particular way that I would like to highlight. So let's say that it's late at night. There aren't a lot of people queuing up. You're a solo queue player. You just want to have one ranked match before you go to sleep. You had a long day at work, so on. You queue up and you get a match. And on your team happens to be a 4-stack. They're 4-stack because they've all got the same tag, so it's super obvious. And they're in their own little world. I can tell you that as a solo queue with a 4-stack on your team, it's one of the worst rank experiences ever because they're all in their own little world. They're in Discord, they're in TeamSpeak, they're having their communication, and you're excluded. And oftentimes that solo queue player can get a lot of flack for being the one not in the loop, even though it's not his fault. And then on the other team happens to be a 5-stack. So then in that situation, I imagine that that kind of weight thing that you were talking about with being in a 5-stack or in a quad is mitigated to an extent. And you're still going to lose a lot of elo if you lose that match. And it can just be also just in general a frustrating experience. So, I would really like to see just quad queues, just get rid of the 4-stacks. It's uncomfortable for your solo queue players, very uncomfortable to fill that little gap.
I've actually taken to, unless we're a full 5-stack, not getting in Discord anymore. Because I find that you really cut yourself off. Like, if there's just 4 of us and we're queued up and we're streaming, or maybe we're not, who knows? If there's a chance that we're going to be playing with somebody who's not going to be in the Discord that we don't know, then if we end up in like a private server, a TeamSpeak, Discord, etc., we end up really walled off, and the only time we tend to talk to them is like at the very end of the round, and it's such a headache. And you're right, Kix, and it's something where it's like a lot of MOBAs, if I remember correctly, when they do like team queues and stuff like that, they get rid of the quad stack as well because it doesn't fit at all. And like, yeah, it's a bummer if there's only 4 of you and you can't get 5. Like, that sucks. You have to kick somebody out. But ultimately, at the end of the day, like, I think whatever works best for the huge majority of the player base ought to be done, even if it does, make a couple people have a worse experience. It makes everybody else have a better experience. I think that's what's more important.
Yeah, so that's not obviously something that is currently being considered. It's not part of the developer blog, but maybe something they should add, certainly in connection with, but also separately to the issue of the rank disparity. Another thing that is changing is something that we actually talked about before it was mentioned, and that is the toxicity reporting. Currently, there's only one option. You can report someone for toxicity, but as of next season, year 4, season 3, there is an idea to have sort of a more faceted reporting tool. That design has been finalized, and currently there is just some UI and UX design in progress for that. So hopefully that'll just allow for more nuanced reporting from the players, and hopefully maybe helps the developers identify more what the issue could be.
You'd think it would save time for them knowing what they're looking for, because obviously it's such a general thing, reporting someone for toxic behavior. Yeah. You don't know if they're cheating or just being generally, racist or something. Do you know what I mean? So it just makes their job easier if you can select from a drop-down box of what specifically it is.
That's very similar to Overwatch. I think, did we talk about that last week, where it's like Overwatch has like a griefing, like racist content, etc. Like, even Twitter, like if you go on Twitter and you report a tweet, like there's, 8 different options as to what you're reporting it for. I think the bigger issue here, and I don't want to say this with great assuredness in case I end up being wrong, but to the best of my knowledge, reporting on PC is decently straightforward because you play the platform that it's hosted on PC is something that, Ubisoft has direct control over. Not the case on PlayStation and Xbox, at least from my understanding. I think the bigger issue is ensuring that there's actually stuff done about that. I think one of the most common complaints that I see on Twitter, Twitch, Discord, etc., is how people team kill or people grief on console, and they'll, the report button does nothing. It does absolutely nothing. It's a dummy button, and you can report somebody over and over and over again, to the point now where the best way to get somebody banned is if somebody's griefing you or DDoSing or something like that, egg them on in like your DMs on either Xbox Live or PSN and have them say something like racist, homophobic, or sexist, and then report them through their chat messages, and then they end up getting like a 2-day ban or something along those lines. And it's sad that the best way for, like, if somebody's like relentlessly team killing you or is trolling or griefing you, etc., that the only real way to have any kind of action against them is to try and get them to say something inflammatory and over the line in the DMs. Like, realistically, there needs to be some kind of, I guess, like better oversight with either Microsoft or Sony or Ubisoft. I don't really care who it is, but I just hear so often how terrible the console experience is because you've got all these little kids or people who act like little kids who go around because they know that there's no repercussions and they're never going to be held accountable for their actions.
Yeah, and I mean, whenever I've run into a cheater the few times, they always have the same line as well. Just go ahead and report me. I get reported by all 5 opponents every match, and I can guarantee you nothing happens. Obviously, are they telling the truth? We don't know, but that's the one line that I've heard from just about every cheater that I've ever played against is the report button won't do anything.
But there's no system to tell you that it is doing anything.
True.
And it would be cool if when you see the notification in the top right corner, like even something as simple as this person was reported X amount of times, and then they got banned. Maybe the number's so low that we're all like, wow, really, the system's that efficient? It only took 15 reports. I don't know. There's a number of other ways they could do it. They could give you a pop-up when you launch from the game. They say the same way they do with the whole ranked points thing. Oh, we deducted these points. We added these points. You played against somebody who got banned. Maybe they also just add a little notification, and when you log in, this person who you reported was banned. There might be some kind of a reason that they don't do that, and I imagine there is, maybe privacy. But it's it would be nice to know that the people you report actually do meet what they deserve, I suppose. Well, depending, of course, on the report.
Overwatch did that as well. I think League does it. Rocket League does it. I mean, even Twitter does it.
Yep.
If you're doing, vigilante work, reporting people, there should be some form of feedback to say, hey, thanks, great job.
Mhm.
We took care of that. There needs to be some kind of positive feedback for you, because right now, as Kick said, like you're screaming into the wind and you have no idea if anybody's hearing you and you have no idea if anything's going to come of it. It's very frustrating because you feel powerless when it's happening. And then the report function should be a way for you to feel like you get some semblance of that power back. And it doesn't. It just makes you feeling a little bit more confused and a little bit more angry, almost as if your input doesn't matter. And there's nobody there to hear you with a pretty valid complaint if you're playing with somebody who's ruining your experience, right? And I think having like a pop-up come up would be a great idea. I don't necessarily know if it's privacy related. That's interesting. I think it's just that, like a lot of things in this game, if we're being completely honest, they're just not there. Like
it could be. I was trying to justify the non-existence of the feature. I don't I was trying to play devil's advocate for Ubisoft. They do a good job with a lot of stuff, but there are some, in this case, I'd say it's a feature that's lacking. No, but we could say that about so many.
Yeah, it's an odd thing that, especially when it comes to gaming, like you mentioned Twitter, you report someone, and if it's legitimate, you will get a message, a pop-up that says, hey, this person has now been banned based on your report. And that is a gratifying feedback. It makes you believe that there is someone listening to you. The thing is, like with games, it's not just Rainbow Six. There are other games as well. Like even when you post evidence online, you have someone either cheating or being racist or homophobic, and you post that and it has the name in there. Like a lot of subreddits will just straight up delete that because no witch hunting, which also just, to me, sometimes when you have hard evidence, it just seems an odd thing to sort of remove that no matter what. And I just wonder, some games just seem to do it that way.
Well, the no witch hunting thing is just that those particular forums, whichever one they might be, whether it's Reddit or something else, they're just trying to avoid the dialogue that brings up. They're trying to avoid the kind of the conversation that it brings to the front, which is pretty much what we're talking about right now. It's the fact that these people who are griefing, who are being toxic or cheating outright, they exist. And it's not fun to talk about them. It's not fun to think about them. It's not fun to encounter them in game. And in a perfect world, they're all just gone, and you don't have to worry about it. And trying to put up that front is understandable, but that's not where we are right now. I mean, I very recently actually had an experience where I was playing Siege. I think it was yesterday, and I encountered a DDoSer. We're up 3-0, and then everyone's disconnected from the server. And a lot of times you queue up again. But this particular one happened to have it set up in a way so that I got an abandoned sanction, and I just didn't want to play the game anymore. And it's a very real thing that happens in Siege these days.
Yeah. DDoSing is a massive issue. I don't know how they're going to handle it. I don't know if they are. I mean, from my understanding, most of the blame for why it happens falls on, the servers, not necessarily Ubisoft, because they're not Ubisoft servers, they're Microsoft servers. But I probably get 2 to 3 tweets a day where I'm tagged with somebody being DDoSed saying like help. And it's way, way too common. You get these juvenile little script kiddies who are, 12, 13, 14 years old, who think it's funny to be able to DDoS because that's the extent of their knowledge. And it gives them some semblance of like power or relevancy, whatever. And it also gives them elo. Let's not kid ourselves there, because that's very valuable. It's a very valuable commodity for a lot of people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's just like console's got so many issues right now with Rainbow Six, and it's getting to the point where I'm just going to say, like, just enable mouse and keyboard on Rainbow Six console. Just do it. Like every single time there's a go for. I don't know when console go fors are, but I know when there is one, because my DMs or my mentions flood with people being like, once again, lost another go for, like, and for some reason, I guess like I'm somebody called the Ubisoft support yesterday, because it's just like, I don't know why, like I get tagged and stuff. Flanked gets tagged in a lot as well. If he was here, I know he'd attest to that. But it's just like, it doesn't make any sense to me that we're getting to a point now where it's like, for high-end lobbies in console, from what I've heard, and I don't know how true this is, if it's all based off anecdotal evidence, But from what I've heard, it's like, mouse and keyboard players are rampant. And it's something where it's like, at this point, I'm like, you know what? Just enable it and let them go wild. I hate to say it, but it's like, it's getting to a point where you can't get rid of the Zim because they just patch around it. Fortnite tried to get rid of Zim. They enabled default mouse and keyboard support, and then they start grouping you in the respective lobbies. And then Zim spoofs, so you think it's a controller. So you're playing against controller players with the mouse and keyboard, and they just kept patching it. And it's a never-ending fight that the developer's just not going to win.
I don't know enough about console to speak as an authority, but I feel like I've heard people talking about, again, this is very distant in my knowledge. I've heard people talking about that they want to long-term support keyboard and mouse on consoles in like a standardized form. And in some cases, I think that's already the case, isn't it? So I don't know. The whole console thing is really tricky for me because I, as a non-console player, I respect the controller and I respect what it does to the game. It creates kind of really a true balance for a lot of people. There's a lot you can do configuration-wise with a keyboard and a mouse. There's a lot of different mice you can get with different sensors, different shapes that will react differently to how you hold the mouse, how you move it, your sensitivity, and all that nonsense. And the controller, yes, has some configuration, but it's much less extensive, I would say. And I feel like that, again, that creates kind of an even playing field for a lot of people. I mean, it's the same thing with the fact that, yeah, you're locked on 60 FOV in console Siege. And some people really like that. I'm not saying it's right or wrong because I don't play console Siege, but some people truly appreciate that. And it's hard to advocate ruining that sanctity. Now, I really don't know what the right direction is. I'm just saying that there's two different parts to this.
So allow it, but just force them to queue together. Because if they allowed it, I suspect for those that want to use mouse and keyboard and console, it would be a much better experience than what they have at present anyway, which I hear isn't particularly... It's not like playing with mouse and keyboard on PC because you've got because it's set up for a controller and you've got the dead zone and there's a lot. It's like, obviously they can be more accurate than a controller, but if they just permit it natively and then let them all queue together and then let all the people with the controllers queue together, perhaps that would be the solution, Interro.
That's what they did for Fortnite, wasn't it? This is like everybody's on controller, played with controller. Everybody that was on mouse and keyboard could play on mouse and keyboard, and there was cross-platform support for that one as well. But like I said, there are peripherals that specifically market themselves so that you have an advantage over a controller player. This isn't even a console thing. I own an Xbox One. I own a Switch. I love playing on console, and I play a lot of games with a controller, but not first-person shooters, because I feel like with FPS games, it's objectively easier to aim with a mouse and keyboard because it's way more accurate. You have a lot more control over it. And that's why I think a lot of people are drawn to using mouse and keyboard over controller, especially like a game with Rainbow Six where there's no aim assist to try to level the playing field like there is on Call of Duty or Battlefield or Fortnite, etc. So the problem is that I don't know if this story is 100% verifiable, but I'm pretty sure it was that Fortnite did that. And then they patched out the ability for these adapters to, you'd be playing on a mouse and keyboard with a specific adapter that spoofs the fact that you're on a mouse and keyboard. They think you're on a controller. Within like 2 or 3 days or something like that, the company had already patched it out so that it was back to being seen as a controller, even though you're on a mouse and keyboard. Because to a lot of people, I hate to say this, but using a mouse and keyboard on console isn't because it's easier. It's because you are better than the people you're playing against because you're more accurate and it gives you a leg up. And I think to a lot of people, that's a big draw. Just as they would boost, just as they would cheat, they want an advantage and they see that as an advantage. And the problem is that as much as I support that, I absolutely think like controller lobbies and mouse and keyboard lobbies are totally the way to go, especially with consoles moving forward now that like Sony and Microsoft are starting to actually build like their own infrastructure for mouse and keyboard. I think that the biggest problem is going to be these third-party adapters that deliberately go out of their way to give you a leg up by making your mouse and keyboard look like a controller so you play against people with control.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think that regulation would be the right way to go, where you just direct people to the correct location. But I mean, that's totally reasonable because then the people who want to have their controller experience can still have it. But then it becomes, and Parker, you know this as well as I do, as like, how is that? Are we just going to split it down the middle in terms of esports? Is your weekly go for going to be 2 weekly go fors now for console? how does that factor in? Because that's gonna complicate things so much, especially in Siege. Because you're right, there is no aim assist. There's no actual reason in terms of just taking. Let's grind it down to just taking a fight with somebody. There is no real reason that you would want to use a controller over a mouse and keyboard. Because if we're just talking about a gunfight, then you have a distinct advantage with mouse and keyboard. So, or do we just then support that for console esports in Rainbow? There's too many. There's so many variables there. And again, yeah, the long term, I'd say support from Sony or Microsoft for mouse and keyboard on console is probably going to be where that's the direction we're going. But then I don't know. In terms of consoles, why are you buying a console now? I mean, just because it's cheaper? Well, buy a phone. You have a phone. Phone gaming is coming into the forefront now, and Siege doesn't support that. But that's a whole different conversation. I'm getting distracted.
Well, I mean, I think just the reason why people buy consoles are because they're cheaper and they're seen as easier. Yeah. I mean, they are a lot easier. They're not as easy as they used to be, but they're certainly a lot more straightforward than a PC. And I don't hate using a controller. I don't like using controllers for shooting games. If there's aim assist, I don't really care. Because obviously it makes up for it, but it's like with racing games, action adventure games, like that kind of thing. Like I have no problem using a controller for that.
MMORPGs,
yeah, also true.
Platformers, you can argue you have better control, even better control with a controller.
Absolutely.
I found playing The Witcher so much easier with a controller than a mouse and keyboard. So.
Yeah, because whenever you're trying to follow somebody and they're walking slow and you're pressing W and you pass them and then you stop and then you press it again. It's just so annoying. A lot of games can be more fun with controller, but FPS's Siege specifically, no. You can't even lean without aiming, or did they fix that?
No, that's still a thing. I think it's always going to be a thing.
Great fun, yeah.
They say that, don't they say that part of that is they're like, oh, there's not enough like buttons on the controller, and then it's like, but a lot of people turn around, they're like, oh, well, there's like Scuff and Elite controllers and like that have additional buttons on it. It's like, yeah, but then you can't like, you just can't be like having people buy like, how much is a Scuff controller? Like $100-$200? Some crazy number. Like,
actually, a lot of those extra buttons that come on Xbox controllers, for example, are now like super standardized. I have a third-party controller that I bought for like $45. But it has like 3 more buttons than the normal Xbox controller, and I think it was cheaper. I don't know how much Xbox controllers cost.
I think they're about 60.
I'm not the one using it.
They're about 60. I think so. Yeah, something like that.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go.
I think they're like $60-$70 Canadian. So yeah, it depends on regional pricing.
Well, there you go. There are options other than Scuff that have extra keybinds, and adding the feature is not something that I think would be too terrible. If you can configure your binds, then you may as well just add the section in as like in blank, and then if someone has extra buttons, there you go. They put the bind.
I don't know. I mean, for me, it makes sense that the key bindings on a console game are sort of aimed at the default that everyone gets when they buy that console, the standard, rather than incentivizing and maybe rewarding people who go out and buy additional custom peripherals and then get an advantage because it gives them even more options in the game. I don't know. I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword.
It happens on PC though, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah, I was about to say.
True. Yeah, fair point.
And now we're going back into the conversation of the sanctity of console gaming, where you have the purists who really like that everything is standardized, that you can't configure your FOV, that you have the controls just this is what you are, this is what you have, this is how it is, and everyone's using controller. Those people exist. They are, and they're not necessarily misguided. They're just, this is how they like it, and I can appreciate and respect that. So you have to figure out how you balance that. It's a really difficult one. Mm-hmm. Parker's idea of just splitting them in two, it was, in my opinion, like that's a reasonable fix. But then there's the player base to consider, and it was the same thing we were talking about with matchmaking. It's like if you decide to make a solo and then just a 5-stack or something along those lines, then you fracture the player base to an extent. But you have to find out where the line is, where you're willing to push to make everybody comfortable and have a good system that's fun for everyone.
And one thing I can guarantee you is that whatever options they choose, there'll always be people
Oh yeah,
who won't be happy with it and whom it doesn't suit.
Yeah,
it's always going to happen.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are people who still think that old Siege was better than the Siege we have now, and that's just ridiculous.
I was going to say, Flanked said a while ago that if on console it had mouse and keyboard support, but with a separate queue, and you could control FOV, and you had, some of the options that you had on PC, he would actually be well up for just switching and playing console, and queuing up with the other mouse and keyboard people. And I totally get that because, just 15 minutes ago, we were talking about hackers and that sort of DDoSing and stuff like that, which I feel like is perhaps not DDoSing, but hackers and stuff like that is way more prevalent on PC. It's way more of an issue on PC.
Question: Do they have 144 hertz support?
Well, yeah. No, obviously you'd have to overcome that and the FOV. I mean, we're talking.
I think it's 60 FPS, 60 hertz. It's locked.
Yeah,
and I can't do it.
Yeah, for sure. But like, if the next generation of consoles had 144 hertz and you could pick an FOV up to 90, then you could use mouse and keyboard. That would be pretty. I
think for a lot of people, that's super accessible and very much happy place. Like I remember when I saw there was some kind of advertisement for the new Xbox, and they said we're talking up to 144 frames or something like that. It was the kind of a little bit of a meme, but it was actually really awesome that there's going to be a console out there that eventually will support that. And yeah, the theory of native built-in mouse and keyboard support on console, I do think it would open up a demographic, and I think it's the right way for consoles to head long term. Again, because if you're talking about pure cheapness and you're okay with a totally separate control scheme, phone gaming is a real thing. I as much as I don't truly care much about it, it's not something in front of me that matters to me every day. It is the most accessible form of gaming because everybody has a phone, and it is very popular because of that. So on the cheap end, you've got that as a factor to consider, and consoles have to start moving a direction in order to stay relevant. And I think that that is a long-term a good goal for them.
Talking about phone gaming with that Google Stadia, if I've heard it correctly, you'll be able to I think there's a controller and you'll be able to plug your phone in and it will just basically be a monitor. You'll be playing the full game that you'd be playing. Yeah.
Isn't that the thing where you're playing on a server and it's sending it to you? Yeah. Wouldn't that incur just ridiculous amounts of response lag or response time lag?
That's what everybody's saying. So,
okay, then no, never. From me, from me, I can. For some people, maybe if you're only paying for the controller and it's let's say $100, and then you pay a subscription or $10 a month. For a lot of people, people who aren't gaming all the time, casual gamers, that sounds great, but not for me.
For a lot of single player games,
consoles though, right? It's for casual gamers. That's a lot of people don't care about.
Such an out of my world kind of conversation we're in right now. Yeah. I feel super inequipped to.
The next topic is good though. I like the next topic.
Yeah.
So I think we will have to see what Google can do, because I mean the concept of and I'm just taking us further off track here. The concept of having games run on a server and having it remotely, that was a big discussion in 2008. I remember when I was working at Microsoft, this was this big new thing, cloud gaming, and it never took off exactly because of the connection problems, because of the slight lag that you get. And I'm guessing, well, hopefully, maybe Google can make it work. Maybe the technology has advanced to a point where it is feasible. I guess we'll see later on this year.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I feel like if anyone can make it work, Google can.
Yeah,
we shall see.
Yeah, that's fair.
So one of the things that is also changing, and let's try and move on a little bit, is shotgun wall destruction is unreliable. So again, we have here the description, and this is from the Concerns and Issues blog post. Shotguns are inconsistent when used to destroy wooden beams. Objective: we want to ensure that the destruction of wooden beams is reliable for both player comfort and ensuring we do not force players to spend extra time attempting to destroy wooden beams. Status is that this a fix for this is targeted for the next season, and we have implemented and turned off the fix while we address remaining bugs. Once those are fixed, we'll turn it on. So this is already in the game, ready to go. They're just polishing it, and there we go. The question is, I mean, the way it's worked in the game from launch all the way up until now is that when one of your shotgun pellets hits a wooden beam, the wooden beam is severed and destroyed. And if it doesn't, if you manage to shoot the wall and the pellets all seem to miss, then you have these beams remaining. Has that been a massive issue for anyone ever? It's
If I may, actually, this is really interesting for a number of different reasons. One big thing is that I would say outright no, not really. Like in terms of site construction, especially at an esports level, people work with what they have. But this has been brought up a number of different times. I'm getting a little sidetracked. Is that Rainbow Six esports is a little bit slow paced, and if you could, in theory, speed up the prep phase by making shotguns more reliable and efficient for destroying walls, maybe making it so prep phase reinforcements go up faster, and then cutting off a few seconds from the prep phase. Long term, like that could be that could help a lot with their esports viewing experience, which would be great. So I'm all for making shotguns more efficient when it comes to soft destruction. That sounds like a quality of life change that gets a solid thumbs up for me. If every shotgun acted like a Buck skeleton key, though, where does that leave him? Is a big question in my mind.
Yeah, we talked about this last week, I think, where it was like, how many times do you throw an impact grenade and there's like 1 or 2 studs at the bottom and you can't vault?
Yeah,
because it's like you throw an impact grenade and it blows up all the wood, but then there's like 2 studs at the bottom, and it's like really weird because it's right in like the middle of the circle. So you have to look down and like try to find where you can vault, and it's like I can't tell you the amount of times when it's like it's an Oregon basement defense and you've got, you're trying to vault from like supply to laundry because they've planted default, and you have to waste like 5, 6, 7 seconds as you do like the gurmy wormy trying to get out of this vault hole, and they can see you from the hatch, and it's like, well, now I'm dead, And hookah on coastline is another one that's really tough to be able to get through because of the whole bottom of it being so hard to shoot through. And it's just, I'm assuming that it's done for balancing purposes, but it's so frustrating that these wooden studs are just, you can't destroy them with caliber based destruction. It's only shotguns and explosives, right? And it's very irritating. That lack of consistency is tough. And I don't know if you guys remember this, on the TS about a year ago, shotguns sucked at like opening stuff up. And it was Oregon basement when they redid all like the dressing of Oregon. Shotguns took like a solid 1.5 minutes to open up a part of the wall. And the rumor was that everybody thought like, oh, they're doing it to like buff impacts because nobody's taking impacts because like you just bring shotguns. Like now you have to take impacts, blah, blah, blah. It was such a dreadful experience. And I agree with Kix. Like you can't make every gun like Buck skeleton key because you have to have shotguns that are good with destruction and ones that aren't. But it's the consistency that's really frustrating. And Kix, you remember the days when caliber based destruction was just bonkers, right? Like you could take like a deagle and you could shoot giant holes with it. Then they nerf that back. I don't know if the solution is maybe for some of the higher caliber weapons, make it so they can break the studs without needing a shotgun. I honestly don't know, but it's certainly very annoying, and it's just a little quality of life thing that I think it doesn't break the realism or anything like that. It just makes it way easier to play around.
This is also really relevant in terms of balance, because what you were talking about when Parker was, you're right, is certain shotguns should remain very, strong for soft destruction. Maybe that's something they want to use for balancing. But then when we come to like the sidearm shotguns, that's something that they've been, I think, continuously using as a balancing implement in their game, is they want to add shotgun sidearms so that this operator is more relevant because soft destruction. And shotguns have always been such an important thing. But if you have the soft destruction side of a shotgun without the lethality of your normal main shotgun, then sure, because you can bring a rifle with it or a SMG or what have you. And they have to be careful. They have to tread carefully with any kind of way that they make soft destruction from a shotgun or any other way more efficient in terms of the sidearm to main ratio. And it's the same, again, like just like what you were talking about with Buck, it's just you have to be careful. So I'm really curious to see what they're going to be doing here. It can be annoying. Not only the wooden studs, but also, like, for example, you ever played Coastline by Hookah and Billiards? Those little half wall things that are on the side. They never fully break. There's other things that can be really frustrating in Siege, and finding a surefire solution to those would be really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm assuming
last week.
I'm
Those
assuming
bits
that
float in the air.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm assuming
the
that
floating bits.
the way it will work is that the studs just evaporate in the area of effect of the shotgun, but that each shotgun will still sort of have its own spread and will make it its own size of hole. So if you're bringing like the revolver shotgun, the Judge or whatever it is, you're still going to have to use all 5 shots to get a hole that is even crawlable, or have to use maybe reload and shoot some more to get a hole that you can vault. That's what I would assume it would work like, and that would make sense.
Yeah, I hope that they don't change anything too drastically, because it is going to. We have so many things that change the way the game is played so frequently. Adding another to the list isn't really. It's never good for the esports side of things. Let's just say that you have to pace your changes, especially if they're super drastic.
Makes sense. So one more thing that's changing, and this is an interesting thing as well. This was only added, again, as I said last week, the map pool. The description is, we have too many maps available in the ranked map pool. Status, target for Year 4 Season 3, which is next season. We are in the process of reassessing the number of maps present in the ranked map rotation. Additionally, we are determining which maps to include in this reduced map pool.
I can only hope that there's something else behind that system than just a reduced map pool. And I'll explain why. There are a lot of people who think, okay, just pure ESL maps, and I'd be okay with that. I would be content. But there are other people, even professional players, like Goddess, for example, I think it was, who says they like some of the maps that are not in the ESL map pool. Then that's totally reasonable. So I'm just saying, I hope that there's something along the lines of maybe they pick 5 maps out of the map pool, or 3 maps out of the map pool, and each team bans 1 or 2, and you play the last one. And that way there's some semblance, some amount of choice. It doesn't have to be that elaborate. It could be just you pick what you want to play, like in Counter-Strike, but obviously people worry about queue times. I hope that there's something more than just a random map selection, because as much as a lot of us think that just adding competitive maps and reducing all the other, just getting rid of all the other ones would solve the problem, there's still the randomness, and there are maps that a lot of players don't like playing in the ESL map pool. So I want more than just a reduced map pool. I want an actual system to get comfortable maps, get fun maps that everybody enjoys playing, and maybe one person's upset rather than everyone.
And then if you're playing a session and Hereford or Skyscraper comes up, in succession, you can say, right, I've done my good deed of the day. I've played it once. Now it's out. I can vote that one off. So I've said for a while I'd be in favour of a voting system.
Mm-hmm.
I can get where Goddess is coming from with the fact that she's like, I'm tired of playing ESL maps. They're all I scrim. They're all I play. I can totally understand that, 100%. But I don't think that for the other people that if you're not a pro player, you shouldn't be subjected to terrible maps. I hate Skyscraper with a burning passion. I strongly believe that it's like Skyscraper needs to just get out of here. A Hereford needs to go. Chalet needs to go. I remember back when the ranked map pool was every map. And then they made the choice to be like, we're going to be taking some of the maps out. And they took out Favela and Plain and House and stuff like that. And it genuinely brought me back to the game, because I was like, I never need to play those garbage maps ever again if I don't want to. There's nothing more triggering than having time for 4 or 5 matches, and you end up in House, Favela, Plain, Oregon, and one other map back in the old system. And it's just this is exhausting. And that was also back when ping was an indisputable advantage. So you'd have people with 200 ping killing you before you'd even see them. That was also back when there were no, the Pro League side switch wasn't a thing. There were no operator bans. The lighting was terrible as well. You'd break a window and it would be the light of God shines in. It's just there was so much stuff that it's I don't know. It's the frustration behind playing the game was reduced so greatly, and I'm glad for it, because it's with these little changes, and I think removing other maps now as well, I think it's going to make it more enjoyable for people to play. As much as people cry about it, I think overall it'll be a big step in the right direction.
I could totally agree. I could flat out say, without any shred of a doubt in my mind, that while hackers and DDoSers are really frustrating, and there's a lot of them right now, the worst thing about playing ranked in Siege right now for me is the map pool. When I get Hereford and then Skyscraper back to back, and maybe some other map that, and it's Chalet next, and I don't want to play anymore. I don't want to play anymore. And there's a lot of things that push me towards that, but the maps are the worst because it's unavoidable. That's the worst thing, I think, is that it's just you're gonna get some bad maps when you play ranked. Some days it'll be better than others. Some days you'll get nothing but what you consider to be subjectively bad maps. And I want some choice. I want an option. I want anything that will help me mitigate that problem, because it is right now, to me, the most frustrating thing about playing ranked specifically.
Yeah, I don't know if that's something we're going to see anytime soon. Maybe a halfway step before having a system. I agree with you. The best solution would be to have like 3, maybe 4, 5 maps chosen and then presented to the players, and then everyone has a vote and see which one gets picked. And that way you can have some control. But maybe in the meantime, just have a system that avoids having the same map come up twice in a row, or even just that tracks what you've been playing throughout the day and then makes sure you have a circulation through there. Because if the selection of maps is always random, what can happen is that you can have the maps that you personally really dislike randomly come up just one after the other. And even just a little bit of a system that helps avoid that could be a step in the right direction, at least for the time being, until we can have maybe a choice. All right then, maybe last topic from this sort of issues and concerns blog is the operator bans. Now, there's no real status here in terms of what's inside, but the description is here: we've seen a high ban rate for Blitz, Jackal, Echo, and Caveira in Ranked. We're discussing how we want to approach the topic of balancing around pick and ban in Ranked and the operators that are affected most by it. And I think that's maybe an interesting topic to look at, because in Ranked, I think the pick and ban has shown itself to be quite a different system than we see in Pro League. In Pro League, the teams have their strats, they know their opponents, they can pick and ban. There can be informed choices that go into the pick and ban. And I think when you're in Ranked, even if you're playing with friends and you know each other well and you've been maybe even have some strats, it's for most players that aren't the very best in the world, I think it's hard to make truly informed choices. And that's why my theory would be that we're seeing this sort of comfort ban. It's just pick the one that annoys you the most, get rid of those. And I don't think that's the intention of the system, and I don't think that's what the developers want for the system. So your thoughts on that?
I totally agree with you there, Rogue. Comfort bans are pretty much the only way that people ban in Ranked right now. There is some emulation of Pro League that comes into, like, for example, the map. So depending on the map you're playing, sometimes your team will be like, oh, we should ban Mira here, she's really strong here, or we should ban Echo, he has some really nasty spots. But for the most part, it's just, hey, what do we not want to play against today? And I know that this is seen as a really big problem by a lot of people, but I personally don't really resonate with that argument. I don't think that it is necessarily such an issue. If you don't want to play against something, then ban it. That makes sense to me. I think that what we should be discussing instead is more how do we get the players in Siege, just the wide audience, how do we get those people more interested in actual meta, in actual competitive Siege meta, in pushing towards the more emulation of Pro League, more striving towards the kind of the competitive nature of Siege, instead of just sitting back, relaxing, enjoying a ranked match, and banning whatever the heck you want. I think that it's a symptom. It's not the problem itself. The ban phase is not the problem. It's just a symptom of the current mentality of the Siege player base. And it's been that way forever. We're getting better at it. Parker, I think, has made some remarks on how the community has been getting better in terms of appreciating and following esports as of late. Yeah, so it's getting better, which is awesome. But
I don't even think it's meta. I think this actually goes back to what we started this conversation off with, which was the whole thing about, solo queue versus like duo queues versus triple queues, quad queues, etc. Yeah. And it's that Jackal is not that annoying in a 5-stack. He can be, but I find that Jackal's way more annoying in solo play because it enables a team. Same with Lion, I think against like a ranked squad, they're more manageable in a 5-stack, whereas it's like going up against a well-oiled team in ranked, I'd rather ban like a Montaigne, or I'd rather ban, we ban Twitch a lot when we play because Twitch has become like the new Ashe, where it's like people just run in with the F2 and just kill people. And it's almost like a crutch operator. When you look at the operators that get banned, I think Echo is strong in every facet. I think Echo's really strong in Pro League. That's why he's usually one of the top 2 most banned operators in Pro League. I think he's really strong in ranked play because he does a number of things. And, what I described this on the podcast last week was, if there's an Echo up with at least 1 or 2 yokai drones and Echo's last alive, it's essentially, a 2v whatever, a 3v whatever, a 4v whatever, because people are watching the yokais and giving him calls, right? It's not like he's all by his lonesome. As for Cav, she's just really annoying in an unstructured environment. She's designed to thrive off of a lack of coordination. And if you're playing up against people that aren't communicating, or you're not queued with them, or they're of differing skill levels, et cetera, Cav is going to be exceedingly strong and very annoying to deal with. And then the same with Jackal. Jackal's super annoying to have to battle against. So it's comfort bans towards operators that aren't necessarily strong in the most structured environment. Jackal's pick rate in Pro League is actually pretty low. Cav's pick rate is basically non-existent. Echo's banned an awful lot. Same with Mira. Legion is banned a lot because he's really annoying. And then you kind of look at it and you're like, what do all these operators have in common? They're annoying to play against. The same with Shields. Like Blitz isn't particularly strong, but damn it if he's not really frustrating and annoying to deal with, especially if somebody's good with him. So I think Kix is kind of right about the get people to play meta and work around them, because if you're playing like a 5-stack versus 5-stack, a Blitz isn't really going to show up, a Cav's not really going to necessarily show up. But more than anything, I think there's ways to tune Jackal and Cav and all that and make them so that they're still like okay operators, but they're not in the position that they're in right now. And I think that's where they need to head, is that they can finally see like, wow, people really hate playing these operators. They weren't just complaining on Twitter for nothing. Yeah. And then they can look at how they want to fix them.
There's also the conversation we had about what you were bringing up at the beginning there is like, for example, coordination, a Jackal is less effective. Why? Because you've got communication. Like if I'm in a 5-stack, a sweaty 5-stack, and I'm hanging out with friends, and everyone knows what they're doing, I start getting tracked. And if let's say I'm on a roam and I happen to have a duo on my roam, I'm going to bait that Jackal into my tracks. I'm going to think about where my footsteps are, my footfalls were, and I'm going to know where the Jackal is because of that. Then I'm going to bait him into my teammate to try and pick up that kill, because I can coordinate that with him or her. I can actually tell them, hey, I'm going to drag him this way. And there's that level of communication is just apparent in a 5-stack when you start working on the grind. Whereas when you're solo queue, like Parker was saying, they're annoying to play against, but also an operator like a Jackal bridges that gap of the lack of communication ever so slightly, where if you're tracking somebody, then you don't have to say he's over there, because everybody knows he's being tracked. It's obvious. It's the same thing with Lion too. So there's a lot of operators that I find will get banned just because you don't necessarily need to communicate with your teammates if you have these operators, because you could just mark on the Echo drone, or you can track them with Jackal. There's a lot of choice there, and obviously it's kind of, again, this is the symptom in my mind. The solution would be pushing people towards communicating more, but you can't do that because often when you're getting home from work after a long day, you don't want to talk to the people who you queue up with in rank. You just want to play. You want to relax. But there's other things to consider, sure, than just how annoying they are. Even though that is true, Jackal is really annoying to play against, just in general.
Yeah, I know. I must admit, I'm guilty of doing the comfort bans, but I don't think I feel really that's okay to do, but it's just a missed opportunity. You could do so much more, and I feel like, given time, the community will come around and understand that you know, they can do clever things with these operator bans where they gain a distinct advantage before the match begins, but they just haven't got to that point yet because it's so new.
It took Pro League a while. It took Pro League like a good half a season before we started seeing actually fully clever plays being made with the operator bans. Well, I think it was like at the time they were SK, I want to say, and now Dark Zero, and they started banning Thermite on border, and they had already practiced with a lack of Thermite, and then they started, and everyone was getting tripped up by it. It was just totally destroying a lot of teams' border play. So they were winning a lot of their best of ones every time they got to border. No Thermite, and they know exactly what to do without a Thermite. Nobody else did, and that's one of the things you can do with a ban phase. There's a lot of other stuff you can do. It's very, very malleable and intricate, and given time, I absolutely agree with you there. There will be some new stuff that comes up in ranked.
Yeah, we saw Lestream beat Empire because on Clubhouse they double hard breach banned as well. I think they banned Hibana and Thermite, and it left it just a single Maverick or maybe just a single Thermite. I can't remember exactly what it was, but you can prep for that and you can play around that. And there's a lot of creativity. I mean, the Thatcher bans that were mentioned in Latin America are very innovative to a certain extent, or were at the time. I think it's gotten a little played out at this point. And I'll be honest, from a casting perspective, having Thatcher be banned, you know, every single round, I think actually degrades the quality of the match. It definitely makes it far less coordinated and, you know, more of a what the hell is about to happen, which is, as a caster, can be exciting from time to time. But if you go back, and Kix will, you know, have a horror in his eyes when we talk about this, a Lion meta where it's just like you have no idea what's going to happen next, and it kills your pacing, it kills your ability to tell storylines. It really hurts the spectating because you just have no idea what's happening. So sometimes sometimes unique bans are cool at the start, and then they get played out really hard. You know, somebody in your chat, Rogue, actually said that, you know, Zeronic always bans Jaeger in every single ranked match. And I've played a couple with him, and I'll tell you, it certainly makes the game play very differently.
Yeah.
Because there's no alternative to him, right? Just as there isn't the same level of alternative to Thatcher like you'd find with, you know, Twitch or IQ. They just don't have that for Jaeger, and there's stuff to experiment with. But ideally, we get to a point where Echo is not a must ban. You know, Mira is probably always going to be a must ban until there's another Mira in the game, should there ever come one. But the attackers have a way bigger pool of operators that they can ban, whereas the defenders are usually stuck with like 4 operators. And I think that you need to be able to, you really need to tweak those defenders so that they're not always must bans, so that you could see, you know, a Legion ban, you could see a Jaeger ban, you could see, you know, a so-and-so ban that actually like makes sense, and that you don't have to necessarily, you know, sweat over, oh, is it Maestro, oh, is it Mira, oh, is it Echo that's getting banned?
Yeah, maybe all it is it takes a little bit of time to develop, but like the developers mentioned, they're looking into it as well, so we'll hear more on that in future. So,
I mean, yeah, like Parker said, it's indicative. Like that those bans give the developers info about, like, you know, what the community. I mean, it's stark, right? You know, we don't like those operators. We don't find them fun to have to deal with. So, you know, what they do with that is up to them. But that information is crystal clear. Yep.
Good. Last little bit of Rainbow Six news before we move on. There was also a dev blog around the exploits post-mortem and the global ordering. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here. Basically, this is, I think you can find this on the Rainbow Six subreddit. There's a pinned discussion right at the top, which has a link to this if you want to look into it. It's quite interesting to see because we recently had a bit of a problem with exploits, and this gives us basically a timeline of how the developers tackled it, how long it took, and how everything was put into place, which is quite interesting to look at. We won't go into too much of detail. That everyone was there. The interesting part, I think, in this post is how the developers have analyzed the problem and what they're going to be doing about it in future. So what they have discovered is that a lot of these exploits that we've seen throughout the history of Siege, basically all the way back, usually when it involves like placing a gadget, then cancelling that, then quickly pulling out your gun or doing something like that, like putting down a breaching charge, then starting to pick it up, but then quickly switching to your gun or your shield or any of those kind of combination of things, that's usually what is used to trigger an exploit. The reason this works is that basically what happens when you perform actions with your gadget, with your operator in Siege. A number of sort of information packets are sent to the server, like, for instance, equipping the gadget first, then activate the gadget, then it says sends a message, gadget activated, then it says sends a message using gadget, and eventually gadget deployed. So there's these 5 steps, and by sort of muddling up those steps, by messing up the order, it used to be possible to confuse the server, and it would then miss out, because if it then has the message coming through gadget deployed before the gadget is being activated, all of that, it gets confused, and what then happens is you have a desynchronization on your computer or console or whatever it is. On your instance, you will still have Clash with her gun out, but everyone else, because the server thinks she has her shield out, everyone else on the server will see the shield, so no one is able to shoot you, but you can shoot back. That's basically the concept. The way they're tackling this now is that in future there is a system in place that when you garble up the order of these messages, it will automatically filter them, put them in order, then send them to the server, so there is no way that you can create this desynchronization. That is the aim going forward, and hopefully that will mean that exploits will be a thing of the past, or certainly the number and the frequency of exploits that we've seen will be a thing of the past. That's basically the news. I don't know if there's much to discuss there.
I mean, I would say it's generally a good thing.
Yeah.
To try and pry at the other side, though, I wonder how many things that you do on a regular basis in Siege are going to be interrupted by that. Things that don't necessarily always come across as exploits, that they don't seem like them, but possibly could be upset by a defined ordering of how everything happens in communication with your client and the server. There's very possibly some stuff that we all do that might just cease to exist. I don't know. This isn't something I could say definitively, but like I just wonder. It would be really interesting to find out once that eventually becomes a thing. But yeah, generally thumbs up. It's great.
Agree. Yeah. Those glitches are so innocuous. You could easily do it by accident. You could easily activate it, but it's obviously like the people that publicize those glitches obviously know how it works. They've understood the loophole and they exploit that over and over again.
I've seen people do the mirror window in the hands glitch thing. Well, not do it, not deliberately, but I've had it happen in my game because I alt tabbed, and only I can see the person holding the mirror window, but it still blocks my bullets. So I had one where I alt tabbed and I basically had wall hacks. I could basically see through the entire map and see where everyone was just because I alt tabbed. Now, this was 18 months ago, so I'm happy to talk about it now because it's not something that happened recently. But about 18 months ago, I just alt tabbed, went back in. I think I was checking a shadow play recording, and then suddenly I could, until the end of that round, Do you run SLI GPUs?
Yes.
That would be it. Yeah. So because I used to run SLI 970s when Siege first came out, and I had that same bug once. Yeah. It's just a random occurrence. I think I was alt tabbing as well. Yeah. Yeah. SLI triggers it because Siege is not good at handling SLI, and you could just all the walls disappear. It happened to me years ago. So that's an old one.
Yeah, it was at least 18 months ago. But you know what? Like, it wasn't ideal because it was not like a lot of the assets and furniture were missing too. So you couldn't really navigate around. You were kind of blind. Yeah. So get SLI.
If I was going to voice any concern with this, it's like, okay, so we're now getting a separate system that filters and orders all of these messages before sending them to the server. What's the impact of that? Does that mean is that an extra few tens of milliseconds that the computer has to process to be able to send that? Where is this taking place? Is it taking place on your PC or console? Is this taking place on the server? We shall see, I guess, but hopefully it will have no noticeable impact at all. That's the goal and the anticipation. But if there's anything that would worry me, it's like, what will the impact be of that in terms of the gameplay experience?
I totally agree, especially when it comes to the networking, because you guys all know what it's like to play LAN and Siege. It's so much better. It's such a smoother experience. Everything just feels crisper. When you're trying to shoot a C4 midair, it's like it's easy now all of a sudden. Whereas trying to shoot one online, it's actually a lot more difficult. So yeah, hopefully that doesn't actually impose any problems on the networking. Speaking of which, the netcode has come such a long way. So it would be a shame to see it go backwards at this point. Fingers crossed.
Any closing thoughts from you, Parker, at all, or shall we move on?
No, this topic in particular kind of flies over my head, and I'll be honest with you, like, I'm glad that they're being transparent about it. I think that's great. I worry that being too transparent with the community often ends up being your own, undoing. How many times do people say, like, why is Ubisoft not commenting on this? Why will they comment on this but not about this? The thing with any form of communication and any kind of transparency, when done I would say, or with good intentions, the problem is that it always sets expectations in people's minds as to what an acceptable level of communication is. And the problem becomes that you're not going to comment about every single thing that happens, right? If there's a minor exploit that's taking place, you're not going to come out and be like, hey, yeah, we're going to deal with this. Like, there's just not enough hours in the day for you to talk about every single thing that people want you to talk about. Very similar to us as casters. We'll get railed every now and then from somebody being like, why are the casters ignoring this? And it's like, well, because there's 18 other things that are happening on your screen. And if we ignored what we were talking about to talk about what you want us to talk about, somebody would turn around and be like, well, why aren't they talking about this? Which is what we were talking about in the first place. So the problem with that kind of communication is that I find a lot of gamers can be quite entitled when it comes to communication. And it almost like, because, in the past, they've talked about certain issues, that there's almost like a hard requirement to mention it. So I like that they're addressing it. I like that they're being upfront about it. And I like that they're kind of trying to set people's, fears aside. But there's a lot of people who just will never see that blog post. Let's be honest. Tens of millions of people play this game. How many of those people do you think actually read that blog post? Probably less than 1%. So I appreciate the effort, and I think it's good from a PR perspective. But I don't think that, people are going to actively consume it. Just like people think that hit reg still favors high ping, which it just objectively doesn't.
It doesn't anymore.
It's like go into a custom game with 200 something ping and shoot a camera and see how long until the camera breaks. Why? Because the server doesn't recognize you shooting until you sync with the server. So if you have high ping, you can light somebody up and shoot them 4 times, and they'll shoot you once, and then you'll die, and you'll be like, what the? I lit them up. And it's because your ping is so high that the server never actually knew that you were shooting. You shot on your screen, but the server didn't recognize it. And it's like, that's out there. And people still think that high ping is a significant advantage and complain about getting killed by people because, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I admire what they're doing. But like I said, I don't know how many people it'll reach. And it's also just a topic that I'm not too concerned with. Like, at the end of the day, as a gamer, I don't need to know that a game company has acknowledged my issue. I don't. Like, it's nice to know that they have, but I don't think I'm not entitled to an answer, As long as it gets fixed, I'm happy about it. And as long as it's getting addressed, which it is, then that's cool. That's all I need.
Fair point. So all 4 of us, I think it's fair to say, we are relatively interested in esports. And we've had certainly one of the largest, if not the largest, esports spectacle in a long time over the weekend. Now, think of Fortnite what you may will. They have managed to capture a large sort of amount of attention, right? When my grandmother calls me and says, hey, have you heard about this Fortnite thing? That's an indication for you of how big this has become. So over the weekend, we had the Fortnite World Cup. Let me maybe give you a few facts around that if you weren't following it too closely. So we had basically 2 tournaments. We had a solo and a duo tournament. The total prize pool was $13 million, plus there was a $3 million charity prize pool on top of that. The event itself was held in the Arthur Ashe Tennis Stadium, which is the largest tennis stadium in the world. Quite a thing to fill that out in and of itself. The Twitch Fortnite channel, now I saw a number that it streamed for 22 hours over the weekend, generated 17.8 million hours of watch time, with an average of around 250,000 views and a peak viewership of 1.3 million views during this tournament. And over the last 10 weeks, more than 40 million players competed in the heats to get into this. So it's just huge, absolutely huge. But let's talk about maybe the broadcast itself. What about the viewer experience? because obviously, yeah, it's a 100-player battle royale, and I wonder, like, no matter what the hype behind Fortnite is and the sort of hype they've managed to generate with this large prize pool and the promotion of this tournament, can it ever be the best sort of viewership experience that we would expect from an esport?
I think they're great at creating spectacle. If through nothing else than pure prize pool. I mean, Booga, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but the 16-year-old everyone's talking about, Booga, who won $3 million, became the champion. He's now the 10th highest earning individual player in esports ever. Just like that. Bam. Right? He earned more than Tiger Woods did out of winning Masters this year. So, you know, it was that's spectacle. That's fantastic. I'll say every time I've tuned in to watch Fortnite, it's been entertaining to an extent. You know, I can sit and I can enjoy what's going on my screen. And I will say that especially like with Fortnite team fights, those are really entertaining to watch. The building that goes on when two teams that have been working up to each other meet, it's just, yeah, it absorbs. I get attached. It's fun. But I don't know. There's still it's still a BR, and it still worries me that we have such such ridiculous variables when you're dropping in, and you're out that round, you're done immediately. It scares me in esports as someone who likes to be who likes to follow various different esports. I don't like the idea of it because I think it promotes something that's not great. I don't know. Randomness is never good for me. I like to highlight pure skill. However, I will say that I think that they do a good job of balancing that. They really do.
Fortnite is not my cup of tea at all. I don't particularly enjoy it. I don't really like watching it. I suspect that it's marketed to an audience that is roughly half my age. Probably half of our ages, I would say, with the exception of maybe Kix.
Hey, I'm 22.
I mean, I guess, yeah, it's definitely marketed to 11-year-olds, so I guess that would make sense, yeah. But I mean, what Fortnite is accomplishing as an esport, I think is pretty incredible. I don't really like that the game is largely being propped up as an esport by, money being shoveled into it. I think it's really telling that of the 100 people that were competing in solos, a lot of them are not traditionally large streamers. I mean, they're big in comparison to everybody else on Twitch, but that's just because Fortnite is such a beast when it comes to viewership, right? Like the only singular huge streamer that I think was in solos was Tfue, and he did miserably, finished 67th. So it's like he got crushed by a lot of really talented players. And, the guy who finished second, Psalm, is a former Heroes of the Storm pro. So that's really great. I think Rux finished top 10, top 20. He's a former League pro, if I remember correctly, former Dota pro. I can't remember exactly what game he played in. Somebody will correct me, I'm sure. I think it's indisputable that what Fortnite is accomplishing is massive for esports. The only question is how many of the people that are coming in for it are going to stick around, because we've always been told with Fortnite, it's bringing in, it's activating, it's introducing literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to Twitch, esports, to competitive gaming. And I think that's awesome, period. That's great. That's good for everybody. It's going to make esports better. And these kids that come in, these 12, 13, 14-year-old kids who come in and the only person they watch on Twitch is Ninja or Tfue or Myth or whatever, eventually when they get bored of Fortnite, they'll probably go up to another game. And then what are they going to do? They're going to look up streamers for that game on Twitch. And now they're in the ecosystem. You've been able to activate a huge portion of the audience, and Fortnite is a mainstream game now. Everybody knows Fortnite. I was literally getting my suit tailored 5 months ago, and they said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I work in video games." And they said, "Oh, do you work for Fortnite?" That was their first response. This is some 60-year-old guy who's literally tailoring my suit. And it's really hard to stress how big Fortnite is. I got a couple friends that are teachers for kids that are, grade 5 and younger. That's 10 years of age and younger. And they'll literally come in on Monday morning and they'll spend the first 10 minutes of class. Oh, did you watch Ninja? Oh, did you watch Myth? Oh, did you watch Dr. Lupo? Oh, did you watch Tim the Tatman, etc.? And they talk about Fortnite the whole time. They wear Fortnite shirts. I think the people who dump on Fortnite I think it's a number of reasons. Number one, it is a game that is largely directed at children. And especially among the older crowd, they're always going to dislike that. The same reason why a lot of older folks disliked, Angry Birds. Same reason why a lot of them now dislike Minecraft, even though Minecraft's original target audience was older kids. Things that are really popular with children always get looked down on by like adults and stuff, because God forbid you look like you like something that kids like. But ultimately, like, hundreds of people's lives have been changed by Fortnite just by the amount of money they're putting into it. There are 13-year-old kids that finish, 92nd and walk away with $50,000. That's incredible. That's life-changing money for a kid that age. This kid that won, Booga, 16 years old, he walks away with $3 million. He's represented by Sentinels, which is the company that runs the Los Angeles Gladiators in Overwatch League. It's a pretty decent organization. And on top of that, he gained like 130,000 Twitter followers. He gained 70,000 followers on Twitch. He gained 200-something thousand followers on Instagram. He gained, almost 200,000 YouTube subs. Not only did this kid win $3 million, but he just won a free career as a content creator as well. You best bet your ass that when this kid goes to stream for the first time after coming back from the Fortnite World Cup, he's probably going to be getting, 7, 8, 9,000 viewers easy on his very first stream. And he's going to rake it in. I think that having Fortnite be the juggernaut that it is as an esport is really good, because I think it brings a lot of interest and a lot of attention. And I'm just very hopeful that the people who are interested in Fortnite, whether the game is fun or not, whether you like the game or not, I just hope the people that are interested in it as an esport stick around, because if so, esports in general will be in a much better place because of that huge boost from all of the new people coming into every single game.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There's one thing in particular that I appreciate from Fortnite, and it's the legitimacy that it brings to gaming in general. Because I know, for example, there's a lot of people in our line of work have had this experience whereby they, in the past, where they're talking to their family or distant family, and they're having a party, and they're like, "Well, what are you doing these days?" And you're discussing your job, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I work in video games. I work in esports," and they're like, "Oh, okay." And there's the disdain in deep in their voice, but they don't understand. They can't possibly, and they get a little distant in that conversation. And even for me in particular, when I was growing up, I played a lot of video games, and my family never understood it. They put me down for it. They put me in a bad place mentally because of I wanted to do video games. That was my life's ambition. And I knew what there was to be had there. I knew what could be accomplished there. I like to think that I did a decent job, but it took a lot of work from my family side for them to realize that potential. They had to seek out the information as much as I would provide it. They had to seek out the information themselves to really prove it to themselves that this can turn into something. They would find documentaries about League of Legends tournaments that are happening in these giant arenas, and they would watch that, and that would create legitimacy for them. But this thing that happened with Booga, the $3 million, 16 years old, that big headline that is flying across everywhere is proactive. It is just reinforcing the knowledge that you can do something with gaming, and it is also creating a lot of misguided souls, because it's definitely not a sure thing. It is a high risk profession to go into, but it creates a level of legitimacy that I appreciate. That these generations coming up who are going to start getting into esports from a young age, they're going to have an easier time of it because it's more realistic, and esports are going to keep growing. It's going to become eventually something that you can get on the path and start grinding, and I appreciate that. I think that's very good. I like that Fortnite is doing that. It could have been any game, and whether you like it or dislike the game, I think that's good.
Yeah, I think you're completely right there in terms of legitimizing it. I mean, one of the articles that's been going through the news here, there was an interview with, I think it was a guy who was part of the duo that placed second, is British, and he was interviewed on the BBC, and they sort of asked him a little bit about it, and they interviewed his mother as well, and she quite openly described, like, yeah, I've threw out the Xbox. I literally threw it out. I snapped headsets in half. I was so annoyed with him spending so much time on a game and so concerned about the time he was spending on it, and well, now he's bringing home more than $1 million, right?
And he's buying her a house.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So this, like, it's and it's not just obviously just her or just the family members, but so many more people now get to see that there is something legitimate here. And like you said, the thing to keep in mind is don't get carried away. Not everyone is going to be one of the best in the world out of 40 million people who competed to get to this point, right? Especially if we're talking Fortnite now. But it is then something like music or something like other sports, right? You can, if you focus on it, you can become one of the best in the world. You can become a member of a band that becomes world renowned. You can. The chance is not guaranteed, and it may be small, but it is there. It just sort of brings video games up to that level of all of these other professions, like professional sports. Like, not everyone who throws a ball is eventually going to become a professional baseball player, basketball player, whatever it is, but at least you can see that as the opportunity rather than, oh, it's just someone sitting at home playing a game, wasting their life. It's not necessarily that. There is more to it than that.
It's like you guys said, there is so much ignorance around it. Like, obviously, you know, I'm not involved with it as much as Parker and Kix, but for example, past weekend, Rogue and I were in Leicester at the ESL Premiership, and just explaining to people that what was going on there, you know, because obviously in the sort of bubble that we're in, you know, this stuff is just second nature to us, but explaining it to other people that are not part of it is really kind of difficult, and there is this kind of disdain for it. Like, they don't understand how playing a video game could be really, really skillful and require so much knowledge and so much training to get to a particular level. And going back a long while, a former colleague of mine, we had an argument about this where she said, she's sort of like a middle-aged woman, and she sort of said, well, you know, video games are stupid, you know, and I said, well, you know, the way you talk, you go home every night and watch TV, whereas someone like me that goes home and plays a couple of hours of video games, I'm socializing, I'm talking, I'm strategizing, I'm solving problems, I'm really using my brain, you know, a little bit anyway, and, you know, like trying to achieve something, whereas she's sat like in a vegetative state watching EastEnders or soap operas or, you know, whatever it is, whereas, you know, a video game is like actually an active pursuit, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of work to be done still. There's a lot of work to be done.
There's this ignorance around like what video games are and what competitive gaming is, and I can understand that there's like, to a lot of people, there's more legitimacy in real sports, quote unquote, you know, rather than esports, because in real sports, you know, it's like mental conditioning, it's physical conditioning on top of being in good physical shape and taking care of your body, which is an admirable thing. You know, on top of that, you also then have to be very skilled at whatever sport you're playing. Whereas in video games, I think we're starting to get to the point in esports now where a lot of teams are realizing that being in good mental and physical shape is so important, because, you know, what's the stereotype of your average professional gamer? It's some short, doughy, poorly shaven, unhygienic dude sitting at a computer table playing video games, you know? And yeah, Kix is doing it right now. And it's like, it's the guy from South Park. And the problem is that we kind of idolize and revere people who are in really good shape because it requires a lot of effort. It requires a lot of discipline. It requires good eating practices. You know, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. And in turn, I think the first time you look at like a professional gamer, a lot of them are not in great shape. A lot of them don't take care of themselves. You know, a lot of them are, you know, they're not outgoing. A lot of traditional sports stars are very outgoing because you kind of need to be. Whereas a lot of gamers are kind of boring. They're kind of nerdy. They're, you know, maybe a little socially awkward because maybe the game is not as much of a team-based sport. So you don't necessarily need the same social skills. So just as a member of society, painting with the broadest brush possible, a lot of people see like esports stars as like, there really isn't that much about them that the regular person envies. But when you look at somebody like David Beckham, you know, or you look at somebody like Tiger Woods prior to his whole issue, you know, like you look at these guys, it's like they're fit, they're handsome, that, you know, they speak well, they're extremely skilled. Like people revere those types of people, you know, whereas you look at your average esport gamer or, you know, esports star and you're like, it's a doughy kid, you know, with bad facial hair and, you know, bad posture. But we're starting to see that turn around. And I think with that, there's going to be greater mainstream legitimacy, because now a lot of, esports teams are realizing that having like a proper fitness routine and a proper, hygiene routine and proper eating habits and, not staying up until 4 a.m, these are very important things. And I think that just like with that alone, I think it's slowly changing perceptions. And I can't tell you the amount of times that people will like almost like sneer at me or like look down their nose at me when they're like, what do you do? And it's like, I'll tell them like I work in esports. They're like, that's a job. And it's like, yeah, it's probably a better job than yours. I don't laugh at the fact that you do some, mundane job that, I would never want to work, and it's just like people kind of look at it and they're like, kids get paid money to play video games. And it's like, yeah, kids get paid money to play real sports as well. There's a lot of things that you need to do to be good at video games. And I think we're starting to get there. But gaming's not mainstream, not as much as it could be. And once everything kind of comes together, I think all these opinions are going to start to change.
It would be mainstream if it weren't for the inaccessibility of it. I mean, it really comes down to the fact that, like, okay, for example, in Rainbow Six esports, you have to buy, if you want to be a competitive Rainbow Six gamer, you're going to need to spend at least $1,000 on your computer, at least, to get a good one that can push the frames. Then you're going to need to spend a lot of money on your monitor too, probably 144 hertz to start, long term 240. You have to do a lot of research to know what's right and what's wrong too. Like, I could tell you off the top of my head, to a 24 inches, 24.5, if that's what you have available, 1080p, 240 hertz, 1 millisecond response time on your monitor, right? But I didn't learn that just by doing a little bit of work. I had to actually put in a lot of effort to get this basic knowledge to get into esports. Whereas like sports, I think a big reason why they have a lot more respect is not just because of the legacy or because of the people involved and how they act, but also because it's a known quantity. It's, can you put the ball in that hoop, and can you do it in this way? And it's within our earth, it's our rules that we all know. You don't have to think about it. It's just obvious to you. Whereas gaming it's every game is different to an extent. The more that you game, the more that you'll see the ties between different games and how a lot of the rules that are just across them all. But it is something that takes some learning, some serious effort. Even a lot of casual gamers won't get it at first, and I think that inaccessibility is going to be a thing for a long time. In the future, maybe several generations from now, it'll be, we have a computer in everybody's home, or I'm sure the way that computers will work at that point will be very different. But you get what I'm kind of going for here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if the traditional sports went through that as well. Like, I don't know, several sort of generations ago, if people would look down at their children as like, oh my God, you could be working on the farm, but there you are throwing a ball around, you're wasting your life, what are you doing? And then sports started to become a thing. I don't know. I wonder if that maybe was a thing.
People that become sports stars still get that now. Like, if there's, you hear stories about my parents said no, study to be a doctor or what have you, and then you pursue your dreams to be whatever it is. Video games, though, is different insofar as it is basically a sedentary activity. So from that sort of standard, it is quite different to like running around playing basketball. Like, I was listening to a radio phone in today about this, and there is still a lot of parents ringing in saying, "Oh, 10-year-old Johnny's just sat up in his room playing video games for 12 hours a day." But, the parent does need to intervene a little bit there as well, and perhaps, take Johnny down the park or whatever, and there is a bit of parental responsibility to be thrown in there.
For sure.
Yeah, that's the thing, is it's like, if you're going to go out on like a football pitch and play for, 10 hours, you're getting in physical activity, you're doing things to build your body. Like, it's not sedentary, as you said, like, you actually are active, and there's lots of stuff that's like going on that is very helpful for you. Whereas, sitting at a computer for 10 years or for 10 hours a day, for 10 years of your life is, it could kill you. You could develop blood clots, you get out of shape and stuff like that. And I think it's really important to be able to balance that. And like I said, I think we always revere people, I think, who are good looking, who are fit, who are successful, all that jazz. And yeah, Kick said to come back. You were frozen for him, Rogue.
Oh,
like on his stream, you were literally just like the little box. And now Kix has gone and broken his whole stream. It's back. I think it's back now. We are all tiny boxes. Anyway, there we go.
Rogue.
Yeah, it's. I think it's kind of cool, man. Like, you know, my timeline has been filled with these kids coming back home and seeing their parents and their parents being like, "I'm so proud of you. You know, this is great, amazing." And like these heartwarming videos of like these like 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids literally getting picked up off the ground by their dads and their moms being like, "I'm so proud of you. Like, I love you, you know, blah, blah, blah." And it's so touching because it's like, I come from an era, I'm almost 30 years old. I come from an era where playing video games meant that you get your ass beat on the playground. You know, like you got beaten up for being a nerd. Like that's what happened. You know, it wasn't socially acceptable. And now it's like, you know, it's not just socially acceptable. It's like these parents are so overwhelmingly supportive of these kids. And I think it's amazing. And there's a lot of kids that are going to be looking on it, thinking to themselves, like, I would love to do that as well. And they have the opportunity to do it, that they might not be good at hockey, baseball, basketball, football, etc. You know, and now they might actually be able to excel at something. And I can also tell you, like, when I went into casting a couple years back, I didn't have the full-throated support of my parents at all. They thought it was kind of silly. Like, you're going to cast video games? You know, when I first told them what I was doing out of my own bedroom, when I started casting like really small leagues, they're like, "What the hell are you doing up there? You know, that's real? Like, people care about that?" Like, they didn't even get it. And it's like, I can't imagine what it's like when, you know, I'm 27 years old this time and I'm, you know, I just moved home from living on my own. Like, I'm a full adult. I'm working, I'm debt free, you know, I'm going back to school. I can't even imagine the judgment that a lot of parents would usually give like their 14, 15-year-old kid who's like, you know, high school is important, but like, I want to be a professional gamer. As long as the parents are realistic about it, I think it's really good and it can be really healthy. And it's been, you know, I've been overjoyed watching these videos of these kids receive the praise from their parents that a lot of kids would have killed for.
There's also to be considered that a lot of things to do with traditional sports versus, if we're going to stick on this conversation, a lot of things to do with traditional sports versus esports are self-regulating. So like, for example, we were talking about physical exertion. Your body just will stop you when you hit that part where you're pushing it too far. It'll get in your way. And it's super obvious to everyone on a primal level when you just should stop exerting yourself. Whereas with gaming, it's a lot harder to manage because, again, you could just sit in a chair for 12 hours and be fine. At least you could be fine right then. There's also the fact that it's not just self-regulated in some ways. It's manually regulated by people in terms of there are tracks in life right now for traditional sports. If you want to really get into it, if you're excellent, you can start in high school, be noticed, go into college, be again, really stand out from the pack. And then you're straight into, you're the professional corner. There you go. Good job. You did it. You have what it takes. And everything else in esports that's like that, it's just not one-to-one. It's kind of fend for yourself, figure it out for yourself sort of deal. Make friends, network, and try to piece things together. And it's just a very different experience than the ladder climb. And in the future, that will change. I have full confidence in that. We're already seeing some colleges offering courses on esports, though it's still new. And I'd say unrefined. And yeah, it'll get there. We're just not there right now.
Yeah, at the very least, there's universities that are starting esports teams alongside all of their other traditional sports teams. So we'll see that develop. Now, something you mentioned earlier, Kix, and that I want to go back to and allude to a little bit is sort of the nature of whether or not battle royales can actually be competitive. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview for those of you who don't know how these Fortnite tournaments, the solos and the duos, worked over the weekend. So for each of them, there were 6 matches. And for each match, you could gather points. Each kill you got, each elimination, would give you 1 point. Then, if you managed to finish between 16th and 25th position, you got 3 points. 6th to 15th position, 5 points. 2nd to 5th position, 7 points. And if you were the last remaining, if you got the Victory Royale, that's an additional 10 points. And that then over 6 matches, and then we get the winner. Now, the question is, battle royales have all this sort of luck-based luck in there, a lot of the randomness. Are these measures they've chosen, are they good enough to actually make battle royale, to make Fortnite a competitive, truly competitive, or was it just at the end of the day? Is it the question I'm asking, I guess, is did the best players win, or was it just partially very good players and partially very lucky players?
I can jump in here because I actually watched the entirety of the Fortnite World Cup yesterday amidst rehearsals that we were doing for Canadian Nationals. And I can tell you that the way that they had it for the singles, with the fact there was 6 games and you got, $20,000 per elimination, and the way that the final circle moves, and then it's like you've got to like hit like a threshold for damage and stuff like that. I think it works really well for Fortnite. The biggest problem with Fortnite is that, it's a decently big map. Mobility's okay, but the way that it works is that you just build everywhere. And unless you're really well geared, it can be very arduous to kill people because they'll just build and build and build and build. It's not like Apex Legends, where I actually think Apex Legends would benefit greatly from similar rules, because I think in Apex, it's like the drive should be to go for kills. With Fortnite, what tends to happen is you get towards the very final circle and there's still 40 people alive, if not more. And the next thing you know, people are dying and it's just an absolute calamity and it's impossible to watch. It would be great if there was a way in Fortnite to make it so that, you didn't have 40 people left at the very end of the game. It would be great to actually get like a final circle where there's like 10, 15 people max. And it's just not the case because the map's so big and mats are so spread out and people don't really take fights, that after 10 minutes of watching, you've literally only had like maybe 12 people die out of 100. And it's, battle royales from a competitive standpoint are always camp fests. It's that way in PUBG. It's that way in Apex Legends. It's that way in Fortnite. It kind of sucks from a viewership perspective because all the good action happens when it's like impossible to catch it all. I don't know how you fix it, but I think that the system that Fortnite had actually worked really well. You had a couple, I would say probably about 10 to 20 players who always played very consistently. And I think you can say that like those were the best players that day. You didn't have 6 matches where the results were totally different every time. And your top 40 were basically all the same, just like with maybe 1 kill difference. The top 20 at the end of the event were, I think, indisputably like the 20 best players that were there. They didn't get lucky. They were just very skillful. So Fortnite seems to have hit it off really well with their structure, though I would like to see maybe a bit more action. I mean, maybe I'm not the target demographic, so don't listen to me. But at the end of the day, I think Kix hit it on the head. Like, battle royales are really messy. They're really RNG based. You need to do something to try to mitigate that. And I think the system that they have does a pretty good job.
I agree with Parker to an extent. I think they do a pretty decent job in Fortnite, it mitigating the randomness. I do think that one thing is definitely relevant in BRs more than some other games, and that's individual player talent, mechanical skill, and adaptability is definitely a big thing in BR games, and it is what allows a player to be the one who's going to win that day, despite the randomness, because a lot of that randomness is in small gaps. Like at the very beginning, for example, if you're just not dropping the right way or at the right time, then there's even the conversation of like, okay, there's a strategy to where you drop and how you hunt for the gear and how you handle all of that. So there's layers of strategy, there's layers of talent. I just don't like the idea behind it. The idea that you can have a big esport that has this kind of uncertainty to it, where you can just get really stupidly unlucky and it could put you in a terrible spot and that can snowball from there. I just don't like that. And being unlucky is normal in every esport, but it shouldn't be a consistent thing. That's my opinion on it. I think they should work to change that, but I don't know how they would in a BR game. It's not something I'm an authority on, to be truthful with you. I don't like playing BR games because of just that. And so it's something I avoid as a gamer.
Yeah, my position on that would be like if I think about professional gaming and sort of professional gambling, one of the biggest, if not the biggest gambling events is the World Series of Texas Hold'em Poker. And yes, there's a lot of skill that goes into that. And yes, you always see sort of like top players in the world that go to those. But then there is also a lot of luck involved in that. And that's kind of been accepted by people who will watch that, who will follow that. So I think I agree with you and say that it's actually better for like esports when there is consistency and when skill plays the largest amount or is the largest factor in who wins. But I've come around to sort of that, having that realization, especially about sort of poker, means that to me that there is certainly a space for competitions that can have more of a luck element.
I think it's where you want to draw the line on a development basis. Like whatever the developers want to do, that's what they're going to do, and they get to decide where that line is. On a player level, all I can say with Fortnite is it's the right game to be on right now. Like if we could be just kind of blunt, all the content creators, the competitive players, everyone involved in Fortnite right now is as Parker said earlier with Booga, I think it was, they're raking it in. And they're setting up their career long term as content creators, because a content creator is a very good place to be right this second in the gaming world. If you have a Twitch channel, a YouTube channel, any kind of like an Instagram, something that can generate funds in any way, whether it be through direct advertisement, sponsorship, or the system that exists on that platform, like with Twitch subscriptions, if you can get a base level of a decent following from that, you could turn it into so many things. There's a lot of accessibility that opens up when you have that, and that is a conversation for another time. But in specifically for Fortnite, I think that everyone there is in a great spot because of the just ridiculous amount of spectacle that is being generated by these tremendous prize pools. And I'll loop back to what Parker was saying earlier. I respect that it brings people into the scene and that it will disperse them later kind of naturally amongst other games in future. And yeah, I'm happy that Fortnite is happening. I'm happy that it's a thing that exists right now. And I wonder if it'll survive the test of time. That's a big question mark on my head, because I don't know if it's really the type of game to set up the dynasty that like Counter-Strike has set up, for example. But we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with you in terms of like the game pulls everyone up with it. I mean, I can say that I wouldn't be in the position I was in if Rainbow Six hadn't developed the way it was. And I can say that probably applies for all four of us, right? So to a degree, like Rainbow Six in its success has drawn all of us with it. Fortnite is just doing that times 10 or something like that. And hey, good for everyone who's involved in that. Now, there's one last thing in terms of the Fortnite competition that I thought was quite interesting. I was reading through the rules, and one thing I found in there was a rule on peripherals. So mice, keyboards, headsets, everything like that. The way they did that is that they will provide all of the peripherals to the players. So I'll read this out. Event administrators will attempt to provide each player with the peripherals such player requested through his or her eligibility survey. These peripherals will be sealed and not accessible outside the stage area. At the conclusion of the event, these peripherals must be returned to administrators. Player-owned equipment, such as mice, keyboards, and controllers, may be approved for warm-up use only at the designated practice area and not be brought onto the stage. So I think that's not something we do in Siege. In Siege, everyone brings their own stuff, right? No? Yes? No? Yeah.
Yeah, everyone brings their own peripherals in Siege. So I'll just quickly say that there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion, as long as you, as the player, get to decide what peripherals they are supplying you with. Like if I could say, okay, guys, I want my ZA13 with hyperglides. That's the feat that you can put on the bottom if you want to customize. I also want paracord, and they can get me that, which I'd say that a lot of gaming esports kind of companies, they wouldn't be able to do that. But if they're orchestrating all this, they're organizing it all, and they can get me that mouse specifically, I want my QCK plus, and I want whatever my keyboard is, then sure, no problem. 100%. They can decide that I'm going to supply your mouse, but they have to allow the level of customization that PC gamers are so used to, in my opinion. And if they don't, then it's restrictive. It's too restrictive. Because it's kind of like, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's in real sports. Like you think about, I always compare everything to hockey just because I'm Canadian and we sign a contract when we're born that we have to compare everything to hockey first and foremost, obviously. But it's like, you're not going to go suit up for a big game and have them give you like brand new skates, or you're not going to use a stick that doesn't have the same curve at the end, or is taped a certain way, or, your helmet sits a certain way or something like that. Like, and not to mention the fact that most sports players are absurdly superstitious, and not being able to use like your own gear and stuff like that. Like maybe there, this is going to sound weird, but like maybe there are grooves worn into your mouse, maybe there's some way that, like the keycaps that you've put on your keyboard feel or something like that. I think that obviously it's done to try and outweigh the whole anti-cheat, because there are mice that you can put programmable like macros and stuff like that in. There have been rumors in the past where it's like both mice and keyboard as peripherals have been possibly compromised for people who want to cheat. And there's no shortage of ways that people can try to get around that, right? And they can keep it in, their mouse and their keyboard or whatever, because the computer that you're going to be using is totally new. It's not your computer at all. It's going to be under, hard drives or SSDs that are provided. The whole computer itself is going to be provided. So you don't have to worry about that being compromised. And usually your SSDs are immediately locked up. Players don't keep them. You use them, you're handed out, you go to your practice area, you play. There's no internet connection for the most part in a lot of the practice areas. So it's like your game is downloaded, or you've got the LAN build, whatever, you play it, you bring your SSD back at the end of the day. That's it. There's no real room for it to be compromised, even though people make jokes about like, oh, well, they just put a USB like in the back of the computer. Ha ha ha. It doesn't really happen. I think what Kix says is absolutely correct. I believe Dota does this as well. I would need someone to fact check me on this, but if I remember correctly, I think the International does this where they provide you the same peripherals that you use. The problem with that is like, what if you're using a mouse that you can't get a hold of? What if you're using a keyboard that you can't get? For example, the keyboard I use here is an old steel chassis Ducky Legend. It was one of their first signature runs ever from 2014 of this model. You can't buy it on their website anymore. I can't find it anywhere, because I was actually going to buy a second one just in case, because I love this keyboard so damn much. How do they find one of those? Yeah, it's Epic. Yeah, it's Fortnite. They'll probably be able to find one. Let's be completely honest. But like for us, for example, how are we going to be able to do that? And realistically, some of these teams are qualifying like a couple weeks in advance. You have 2 weeks to possibly hunt down all of these peripherals and give them to them. And as Kix said, what if you've got like the easy glider, like the feet on the mice? Like what if you've got it, your wired mouse is paracorded a certain way, or, blah, blah, blah. Like you're going to put people at a disadvantage when they're using gear or peripherals that they're not accustomed to. And I don't know if that's a worthy trade-off, given how uncommon cheating tends to be. I think that there are necessary precautions you can take, and in a perfect world, yeah, you shouldn't be bringing anything with you to the events that you're gaming at, just as a precaution. But I don't necessarily think it's feasible.
I do want to just add to Parker's argument here, because I have, and this is a mouse I've had for about 6 months. I have 3 grooves on this mouse. So like 3 worn-in grooves from having used it, because I hold my mouse in a particular way where my fingers don't move. So that is something to consider. Is you do have great personalization on your peripherals. It's very important, and I think that that is something that they should try to maintain. I think the better solution would probably just be more aggressive screening of peripherals, if you really care that much. Like it, and Parker's right. There aren't a lot of people who are coming to LANs cheating. It does happen. Absolutely, it happens, but it's definitely a rare occurrence. And yeah, if you're so worried, then open up the mouse. You can put it back together. They're designed with that in mind. Most of them are. So yeah, I don't think it's too crazy to just inspect.
We've tested peripherals before.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's happened in Rainbow Six, where I know that we've screened peripherals in the past from a variety of different teams, just as like a precaution. And it's like, it's commonplace. I don't know if we've done it at every single event because I haven't asked, but I know that there have been a couple events where I've asked. They've been like, "Yep, we've checked like mice and stuff like that at random, just like from certain teams, certain players, etc." Sorry,
like a random drugs test.
It kind of is, it's like random drug screening. It's like you'll take a mouse and you'll see if there's anything on it. You'll see if there's any programmable buttons, blah, 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 and go from there. And I mean, like I said, I think it's important to have precautions in place, but it's kind of like taking your shoes off when you fly through, American like border control. Like it's the only country in the world where you have to take your shoes off. Like, what does it solve? Like, I agree with taking precautions, but like sometimes it's needless. And I honestly think that's like, it's a perfect comparison where it's like, you don't need to take your shoes off to go through a metal detector for crying out loud. Like it doesn't do anything in the grand scheme of things. Well, all it is a massive inconvenience. It's like the same with screening peripherals.
That came from that British bloke who was the shoe bomber. I don't know if you recall that.
Amazing that everything else in the world is able to run without you forcing to take your shoes off. And somehow we haven't descended into this dystopic anarchist nightmare.
What's it called? Security theater, something like that, or it doesn't really matter.
It's just designed to make you feel safe when in all reality, there's nothing that actually points it to making you safer.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So as usual, that is us for time. If you have a few minutes to quickly go over the standings for the Rainbow Six Pro League, we can do that. But I'm not forcing anyone.
I'm down.
All right.
Didn't we do the standings last week?
I think we didn't actually. I think we completely missed it last week. I mean, we always try to, but we never really do because exactly this happens. We run out of time. So let's have a quick look over. Let's maybe start on EU. I've just brought up the Pro League standings. So we can see Team Empire in first with 5 wins, 2 draws. Looking for Org is second on 16 points. They're only 1 point behind. Then we have Team Vitality on 13 points. Natus Vincere on 12. G2 on 10 points. Chaos on 7. Penta on 4. And Sisu right at the bottom on 1 point. They have 6 losses and 1 draw so far.
I've never heard Natus Vincere called Natus Vincere. That's new. Is that how you pronounce it?
I do have a Latin qualification from high school. I won't pretend for 1 second that I can speak Latin in any way, shape, or form. But yes, I would call it Natus Vincere.
All right, I like that more. That's fun.
That's sort of my German Latin pronunciation.
Eat it, Milos.
All right. So Empire they're establishing themselves as the European team. LFO are looking great. I think really they're fighting hard to get an org. One big thing that I would say stands out, of course, and everyone is going to say the same thing, is G2 are in 5th place right now. I personally think that doesn't necessarily have to do with them, or doesn't reflect poorly on them directly, as much as it is just a symptom of Europe being so highly competitive. There are only a couple teams right now in Europe that really aren't as competitive on the grand scheme. And I would say in certain cases, it's for particular reasons that I think can be fixed quite easily on those fronts. But with G2, they're not one of them. G2 are still one of the teams that are in the running to make it to the land potentially. And they're still one of the teams that could at any moment just start going on a tear. So like, just to get the G2 conversation out of the way from my standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back to the very first match, and G2 came in and they 7-1 Sisu, or at the time they would have probably still been, what were they, Mouse, right?
Mouse,
yes.
Yeah.
So that was just a great start, and it sort of flattened out after that. But then the last 2 matches they've been very good as well. So
they beat LFO.
Yeah.
That was a big one.
Yeah, and LFO are currently sitting in 2nd place right now. So that's a really substantial win, I would say. One thing on the flip side, you've got Vitality, who managed to beat G2 in week 5. So there's been inconsistencies with G2. However, they draw Empire. Correct me if I'm wrong, Parker, but they haven't lost to Empire yet. Not directly.
G2?
Yeah, G2.
No, G2's never lost a map to Empire. They've lost a map to Empire, I think, but I don't think they've ever lost a matchup. Also, I have to very quickly break out. I'll be right back.
Okay.
They love a draw.
Yeah. So on the case of G2, I think they've had some really unnecessary losses. Like I'd say the one to Chaos week 2, but there's still a whole another half of the season ahead of them, and they're within 7 points of Team Empire in first. So
yeah, I think you mentioned a really interesting point like that they draw Empire and they beat LFO, so that the top teams, it's really interesting how when they come up against that top challenge, how they can do really well still. And I think that's something that is a good sign, really. It's if they can get the consistency, they still have the quality, and we can still see great things for them. For me personally, one thing that I've really enjoyed to see is Navi come in as a new team and do really well. They're only just 1 point off the third placed spot right now, 4 points behind LFO on second. So they've done really well. I'm really happy to see that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm happy that I get to say the name Navi as well, because it's awesome to have these veteran organizations involved in Siege that really bring up the legitimacy of Siege esports. I remember way back where no players had salaries and there were no massive orgs involved in Siege, and how times have changed. It's great to see.
Right, and let's look at the next region, Latin America. Top team at the moment is Ninjas in Pajamas on 19 points with 6 wins, 1 draw. FaZe Clan in second on 17 points. Ints Esports on 11. Team Liquid, they are in 4th place on 9, followed by Team 1 Esports also on 9 points. 6th position is Black Dragons on 8 points. 7th is Immortals, they only have 3 points, and then Red Devils Esports at the very bottom on 1 point. There's been a lot of sort of reshuffling, a lot of change this season, or certainly the first half of this season, in terms of the positioning of the teams. I'm really surprised to see Immortals, who've been so great for season after season. No? You're shaking your head.
I can't get over how bad they are this.
Yeah.
Like I can't get over how bad they've been. I just don't understand it, and I'm sure Kix will probably chime in with the same thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. Immortals are in a huge slump, and not only them, but there's this vast inconsistency with LATAM. Like if you look at BR6 and compare it to Pro League in LATAM, they are so different. It's confusing. It really is. Like for example, Team Liquid are in 4th right now, which is just what? How are they find themselves in 4th when they just won BR6 and they beat FaZe in 2nd in Pro League in spectacular fashion? So there's some strange inconsistencies in Latin America that always throw me through a loop whenever I look at their standings. It really makes you question a lot of these standings, so where people find themselves. So I'll say one thing that I like that is kind of rock solid is Team 1 are a better team than people expected them to be, and that's always cool to see. That's great. They're in 5th place right now, beating out BD, Immortals, and Red Devils as well. But it's always nice to see teams come out and be competitive with the titans of the scene, like Liquid, who they currently are tied in points with.
Latin America Pro League is really interesting because NIP has been just so damn good. They lost to FaZe in BR6. I mean, everybody's going to say the same thing. Like, there's a belief that unless it's Pro League, teams won't try their hardest. This extends to every single national circuit, but I think BR6 is different because to Brazilian teams, they care a lot about BR6. Like, this to them is like, it's from what I've heard from the players, and I don't know if you'll back me up on this, Kix, but from what I've heard from a lot of the players, to them, it's like winning it is almost as prestigious as, winning a Pro League finals. Obviously, a Pro League finals is different because it has international competition. It's not a world championship. That's okay. But I think Latin America has been really interesting. Ints has been a huge surprise. I think buoyed by VNX coming onto that roster, and Duds has looked really good as well. He's had great stats. Immortals have looked dreadful. PX's stats have been absolutely awful. And that's a team where it's like you live and die off of Navi's and Cybera, or Cyber. He's been going by Cybera a lot recently. If they're not fragging well, that team is not deep enough. M King's not going to be able to make up the difference. Bullet's okay, but he's not going to set the world on fire. There's a reason why he got shuffled off of Liquid. And the problem is that I think Immortals really needs a better supporting cast. There's great support players that are in Latin America right now that could conceivably go to Immortals. I don't know if they would though, because Immortals are in 7th. They got 3 points. They drew the two next worst teams in both Red Devils and Black Dragons. They couldn't even beat the team that has only won 21 rounds over 7 games. It's an average 4 rounds. Like that's terrible. Or 3 rounds. That's absolutely terrible. And they couldn't even beat them. I don't know what's going on with Immortals, but they need to fix it before the major, because if not, they're one of the first teams that's going to be going out in groups with the way that they've been playing.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. They've been having such a rough time of it recently, and it's very confusing because every time you go into a match, you expect them to perform, and they just don't. They get 7-0'd by Ints. No. There's not a whole lot to say about that. Ints is in 3rd place right now. That's great for them. They're doing way better than anyone expected them to do. Right now, I just say in general, Latin American standings are a mess as compared to when you compare it to like previous seasons or just general conventional wisdom and knowledge about these teams' history.
Maybe a little less balanced, because one of the things that always stood out to me for LATAM compared to the other regions was how close the top 4 or sometimes even 5 teams were to each other. And now we have sort of more of a distribution. Yeah, there's still like only two points between the first and second, but then we have 6 points difference to the 3rd place. Like like Ninjas in Pajamas and FaZe Clan are almost so far above and beyond everyone now. That's unusual for Latin America as well, compared to the last few seasons, I think.
It has to do with the bottom. It's, for example, Red Devils and Immortals both. They haven't had any luck at all. I mean, so when I tell you, and you haven't seen the standings. When I tell you that Immortals have 3 points, now you must be assuming, oh, well, they got a win. Just 1 win? That's all they have this season? No, it's 3 draws. They haven't won yet. They have 3 points off of 3 draws. Red Devils has 1 point off of a single draw, which means that neither of those teams are taking anything away from any of the teams that they're fighting. Not really, nothing substantial that's going to set anyone back. You know, if you draw that team, either Immortals or Red Devils, then you're definitely falling behind everyone, but it's not going to be devastating, not like a loss would be. And that's what has allowed teams like NiP and FaZe to soar so far above and beyond everybody else.
Right, and let's then look at North America as the final sort of the top 3 regions that we have. Dark Zero currently in 1st place with 16 points, followed by Team Reciprocity on 13 and Evil Geniuses also on 13. Luminosity are on 11 points, that's the 4th place. Space Station Gaming in 5th on 9 points, followed by Rogue on 7 points. TSM on 4 points, and right at the bottom we have Sonics also on 4 points.
NA is interesting as well. One thing I would say is that Dark Zero is a team and clearly engineered to win. Like if you look at the individual stats, for example, on Dark Zero, they're the only team. They tweeted this out actually, and it's true. CGG confirms it. They're the only team with all 5 players on that roster having a CGG rating above 1.0. And that's substantial. That means that they're not only going positive, not only are all their players going positive, but they're all performing in game consistently round by round. So they are, I'd say, a workhorse team, and I'm not surprised to see them in 16 points in 1st place. And the rest of North America, there's a few upsets there, like Rogue, for example, who did just manage to win. Was Valencia, right? They did just manage to win that, so that's great for them. But they're in 6th right now, which is obviously not ideal for them. So on the home front for Pro League, it's not going great. But it's the same thing in Latin America with Liquid, who just won BR6, and they're not looking so great in actual season. So there's inconsistencies all over the place with the standings in Siege, and it's one of the reasons why I so truly detest making predictions. Is because at times, whether you like it or not, sometimes in this game the results can be truly, truly random. Like there are teams and there are levels. Like for example, can I get away from NA for a second and take a look at G2?
Sure.
It's often been brought up the fact that G2 perform much better against the big teams, the Titans. And there's so many reasons that could be. It could be the motivation from the players on G2. It could be the preparation on the back end of G2. But I truly think that it comes down to the predictability and the knowledge of playing against those big teams like Team Empire, for example. and yeah, partially motivation. And it puts those teams in kind of a lockstep, if you will, in the way that they play, in their meta, in their in-game tendencies. And it creates that really exciting siege match that we all love to watch, where both teams know what's going on. They're both highly competent. They're knowledgeable about their opponents, and they're motivated to win. Those are the good matches. Those are the ones we all seek out. And those are the ones that are fun to predict. They're fun to investigate. But there are still matches in Siege Pro League, whether it be North America, Latin America, or Europe, because it happens in all of them right now. And the way you can know this is because there are teams in the bottom of the standings who haven't won anything. There are still matches where one of the teams is coming ill-prepared. And those matches are sometimes completely random. Because if one team comes ill-prepared, like let's say they've been through the whole season performing poorly, then sometimes the other team's not going to put in a lot of work to go and try and win that match. They're just going to take it for granted that they'll win. And they'll be like, it's no problem. Absolutely, we got this. And one of the reasons why I'm pretty sure Dark Zero finds themselves atop the standings is because I think that they have, again, I think they're a team engineered to win. And I think that they're a team who have a constant driving force behind them.
Yeah.
Not every team has that.
And yet
oh, sorry, you go ahead.
All right, I'll go. It's just a quick point. And yet sort of to emphasize the point you mentioned about that occasional randomness, like Dark Zero throughout the entire half of the season, they've been so consistent and so strong, and yet they have that one blip in their second match against Luminosity where they lost 1-7. Yeah. So it's just even the team that stands out for its consistency, not just as a team, but even for the individual players, has that little bit of a blip.
Absolutely. I mean, and that, again, the inconsistency and randomness that comes from teams that are less prepared than others, that are less invested in study and research, and knowing what their opponents do and knowing what they themselves do. The inconsistency goes both ways. It's not just, they're going to be at a disadvantage. It's also sometimes the teams that are a little bit more random and wild will gain an advantage over their opponent who expects them to be playing a certain way. And that is why I referenced G2 earlier, because I feel like G2 plays better against the T1, Titan teams in the region than other teams because of the knowledge that this is what they're going to do. We've put in our research. We have an understanding of our opponents, and sometimes with the, I don't want to say less. Sometimes with the less experienced teams, they're harder to predict. They're harder to track. They're constantly changing. They're establishing who they are, their identity. But anyway, I've talked too much about that.
I was gonna say I work with you. I could sit here and listen to you go off on this for like another hour. I always enjoy it. I mirror a lot of what Kix said. When it comes to like Pro League and the way that teams play and stuff like that, you're not going to find a huge amount of disagreement between him and I. You might find disagreement about like things like predictions and stuff like that.
He likes it.
I don't mind making predictions. I tried to stray away from it for quite a while, along with Kix. But I found that the content that Siege GG has put out with those predictions has really motivated and I think brought a lot of people in. And I think it's been good for the scene. It gets people talking about the matches. I think it gets people talking about the casters and you get the friendly rivalry and stuff like that. For example, Hap is one of the Benelux casters, and he's my mortal enemy because we are always in a competition against each other at the top of the standings right now for most correct guesses. But when you look at North America has always been the most unpredictable region in my mind, at least over the last 3 seasons. It certainly has been. Latin America, you used to call it the Big 3, then it became Big 4. Now I think you could argue it's the Big 5, whether it's Team 1 or INTZ. We don't really know exactly what team it's going to be. Liquid are starting to fall a little bit behind, as are Immortals. So who knows exactly what's going to happen. There's likely going to be a shakeup at some point. But for the longest period of time, Latin America, like 2 seasons ago, was like you had 4 excellent teams and you had 4 teams that were like kind of bad, if we're being completely honest. And, you'd have certain play days where it would be like FaZe plays like 6th place team, Liquid plays like 8th place team, NiP plays 5th place team, Immortals plays 4th place or a 7th place team. And it's just like these matches are, how they're going to go, NA is so up and down. The only thing that's really been consistent is that like TSM and the Sonics have not been very strong this season. Outside of that, I think in the in the top 6 teams, I honestly think that anybody could beat anybody. I don't think there's a given favorite going into that. I think that you'll obviously have like teams like DZ, Rec, and EG who you'd want to put your money on. But I think in a best of one scenario, depending on what maps aren't available, because keep that in mind, if both teams play the same map the week before, then there's a random map that gets auto banned. And that has in the past really hurt the depth of certain teams. But I mean, when you look at them, I think anybody realistically could make it. I think Rogue is probably on the outside looking in, but I think like Space Station and up, I think any of those teams can finish in the top two. Luminosity is the only question mark because they started out strong, but they've kind of come back to earth. Outside of that, as Kick said, DZ's built to win. You know, Hyper put up like statistically the second best, I think, split of anybody in NA. And it's like, raise your hands if you actually thought like Hyper was actually that good for this season. Because I honestly thought Hyper had really underperformed this season just from what I'd known. And then I looked at the stats and I was like, boy, how wrong I was. You know, like he had a huge impact on that team. So NA is super unpredictable. I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the groups that are announced tomorrow. I mean, if this is going up tomorrow, then the groups, I guess, will be announced today for the people that are watching. But you've got DZ, you've got Evil Geniuses, you've got, you know, Space Station, Rogue, and TSM, all of whom are going to be there. 5 NA teams. Who knows how the groups are going to stack up? But there's a likelihood that at least 3 or 4 of those teams could make it out of the groups, depending on, you know, if they get a favorable bracket or not. That's something to watch out for. How is TSM going to continue to do? They've looked really good in best of 3s so far. You know, Rogues had a one-off performance in Valencia, which was great, but is there anything to build off of that? DZ haven't had the strongest LAN performances, so they now have an opportunity to build off of that and actually prove people wrong. EG, you know, Gio's got his visa. He's going to be playing. What's going to happen there? And SSG's always been a pretty good LAN team. So there's a lot of storylines for NA going in, and I don't even think you necessarily need to look at Pro League because we can look at the Raleigh Major first coming up and kind of see how these teams are going to do, and then, you know, wonder aloud if that will transfer over to Pro League for the remainder of the season before Japan.
I just checked. Hyper is the 4th best player out of the first half, rated by CGG statistically. The best player in North America is, in terms of stats, is Gacha.
He only played like 3 matches.
He's still got the best stats, man. You can't knock it. Apart from Gacha, if we're not counting him, Laxing was the top performer out of North America. He had an absolutely amazing performance, and it's why it's why Reciprocity sits so high on those standings. Laxing really put in a lot of work for his team on an individual level.
I remember one match on Villa, he just went totally off. I think it might have been against Dark Zero, and I think they were like 4 or 5 down and pulled it back to a draw, and it was just an amazing match. And Laxing really pulls his weight.
Yeah, if we're not counting coaches, gotcha. Limited amount of matches to judge. Laxing was the highest rated player in the world for the first half of the season, and he's 0.01% above Aces, and then he's actually tied for first with T1's own Lukid, which is, you know, again, another one of the reasons why I assume T1 is doing much better than people expected.
All right then. Well, thank you both for joining us, for taking the time. I think we've made this episode a really special one, and I'm really glad that we get to sort of celebrate our 1-year anniversary with a special episode and getting some great insights from you. So thank you very much both for joining us, and thank you everyone for joining us live. If for some reason you only really know Kix and Interro from the Pro League streams, and if you're watching this back on YouTube or listening to the audio version, I will have links to both of their Twitch channels in the description. Definitely hands down 2 of my favorite Rainbow Six streamers, both of them highly recommended, so go and check them out, follow them. And with that, thank you very much, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.